All right, start recording in 3, 2, and 1. All right, and welcome back to the Reserve Squad Midweek Show, a soccer podcast covering all things in the EPL from a bench perspective. I'm your spin, and I'm solo for this episode. We've been on a break, but the season's back, and now we just wanted to kind of get a mini preview out beforehand because it starts this Friday. But also, I wanted to give some thoughts on the U.S. Women's World Cup. Some things I honestly wasn't entirely surprised about. I have spoken about that a little bit before, but I'll go a little bit more into depth. It's not. I think there are reasons to criticize this team, but it's not for the reasons that have necessarily been shared, at least from what I've seen. So I'll get into a little bit about that. And then we have the Community Shield that kicked off with Arsenal besting City in a shootout that ended 1-1 in regulation time. Arsenal equalizing in the dying minutes, so some good drama there. It wasn't necessarily the best game, but we did get a fantastic goal by Cole Palmer, and we did get some good drama at the end. I did think the game though was pretty dull, which we'll get into. As well, and then from there we'll try to kick into a little mini preview. I'll try to go over what the teams have done as far as transfer business goes. And with that said, the season again kicks off this coming Friday with Man City opening versus Burnley, Man City versus Vincent Company, which could be fun. And the preview is going to be pretty small because, to be honest, not a ton of teams have actually done a whole lot. And it's worth keeping in mind that the transfer window doesn't end until the 1st of September, and so a lot of these clubs have actually reached verbal agreements with a number of players, but not a lot's actually been official, and so that could actually be unsettling until those deals get done. And then when you get a new player in, it sometimes takes time for them to get used to their new team. So a number of these teams aren't necessarily going to be what we expect them to be until later on in the season. So that could maybe open up some opportunities for teams that are settled, which we can maybe speak about. But I'll get started with the Women's World Cup. The first game was 3-0 Vietnam. And on the onset, looking back, now Morgan did miss a penalty, so it could have been better than what it was. I remember had some notes that the Vietnam keeper actually had a really good game. So it could have been that 6 or 7 kind of game that people were expecting. Netherlands kind of smoked them. So that's maybe what people were looking at us doing. So this was maybe kind of the first sign that this was going to be an issue, mostly because our attack really did struggle a little bit. And that was really the story as the tournament went on. We played 3 attackers that had never played with each other before this tournament started, and that showed. They didn't really have any kind of a connection with each other. It seemed like Sophia Smith and Morgan wanted to kind of play in the same position, and I think that kind of harmed Sophia Smith's game. She did have 2 goals in this game versus Vietnam, and then you didn't really do anything after that. And we only scored 1 goal after that, so that was a storyline by itself. The next game was 1-1 with Netherlands. We looked clueless out of possession in the first half. I thought our shape was giving us a lot of fits. It almost seemed like it mirrored what we did in the men's side when we played the Netherlands in our knockout game as well, where they had wingbacks and they were pushed high, and it was keeping our fullbacks kind of having to manage against that, and they seemed to have an extra man in midfield by doing that. When Leica Markin was kind of their striker, but he was dropping into midfield to create that extra man, and we struggled. We could not turn them over to save our lives. Now, Netherlands weren't necessarily prolific, but they were able to get a goal on us after, I think, Van de Dijk spun Lindsay Horan, or it might have been Ashley Sullivan or Andy Sullivan, and that was our lone kind of defensive midfielder. And after that, we were cut open, and we looked kind of clueless, getting back. And they scored a really good goal. But after that, we did kind of, the second half was a little bit better. I thought maybe the change was to actually have the fullbacks kind of be a little bit more advanced, recognizing that the Netherlands didn't necessarily have someone to kick a ball over the top to. They didn't really have a traditional striker. The main person, Vivian Medina, who plays for Arsenal, was injured, and they really could have used her. If the Netherlands don't necessarily, they drew Spain in their next game, which is unfortunate for them because I think Spain had been one of the 2 best teams in the tournament. If they had Medina, Netherlands honestly could have maybe gone all the way, to be honest, because they have looked good otherwise. But it does seem like they're kind of playing, they're kind of missing that front person up top. I don't think Leica Morgan is necessarily that player. But anyways, the second half was a lot better for us. It seemed we were able to push Dunn a little bit forward, and that kind of helped us with our numbers advantage. And I thought we pressed them a little bit better. I thought we recognized that our two center backs in Julie Ertz and Germa were able to kind of take on their attackers 1v1. Because that is the danger when you play your fullbacks kind of higher up, is you do expose your center backs, but they were able to handle those tools, and we were able to get a goal back with Lindsay Horan getting a header. And the funny thing before that was her and I guess a former teammate, or maybe a teammate at Lyon in Vanderduck, they kind of went at each other a little bit, and Lindsay right after that, Lindsay Horan ended up scoring a header and kind of did a little a one-upper. I think people were saying poke the bear, and that was a good example to kind of go at. But whatever kind of momentum we thought we had, it didn't really show in the Portugal game, where it was almost like the exact opposite of what we had, where in the first half, versus the Netherlands, we really struggled out of possession. Versus Portugal, our issues were really at the front end. I mean, our attack just completely looked, again, clueless on what to do. And that showed up a little bit versus Sweden as well. Now, we actually had decent numbers at the end as far as shots. I think we had 20 shots. But we didn't necessarily. There were a couple of times when we challenged their keeper, but for the most part, and the keeper did have a couple good saves for Sweden. But for the most part, it was our issues. The entire tournament was not capitalizing on the chances we were able to create. Now versus Portugal, the issue was not only not beating them because that meant we had to draw someone like Sweden for the second game, but we lost Rose Lavelle with a really kind of a lame challenge. It was kind of a weak call, to be honest. So she got yellow carded out. It was her second yellow in 3 games. So she had to miss Sweden. She probably would have been taking a PK, to be honest, because she was one of our better attackers, and it was someone we kind of missed throughout the entire tournament. So that kind of sets us up. I mean, we did play something different for Sweden. It is worth kind of saying that we ended up kind of doing a double pivot with who was it? It was Sullivan and it was it Sonnet? I think it was Sullivan and Sonnet who hadn't necessarily played before, and they did a better job of at least not Sweden weren't necessarily able to play through us, which I think was fine, but I still thought our issues really were in the final third area, where we tried playing Lindsay Horan kind of further forward. She isn't necessarily a creative playmaker. It doesn't seem. She seems more like kind of like a 6/8. And we just kind of struggled to have any kind of like that creative spark. And it seemed like Morgan didn't necessarily have the ability to play up top by herself. She scored. We won our first game, I think, 4 years ago versus, I think, Thailand, like 13-0. And it was Morgan had like 5 or 6 goals just in that game alone. And you just saw Morgan looked a different player 4 years later. Megan Rapinoe as well. I'll have some thoughts to say about her, because the things that have been said, everyone's kind of looked at her as kind of the target. She did miss her PK, to be fair, and she wasn't good all tournament, to be fair. But and I don't think she should have been selected to actually play. But we did have a lot of injuries going into this as well, and I think that maybe kind of played a role in her being selected to join and get as many minutes as she did. But even that said, we struggled to create the entire tournament. It really showed versus Sweden. It showed versus teams that were good defending, essentially. And we had this 18-year-old in Alyssa Thompson. Now, young, I get, and she didn't necessarily look that great when she came on versus Thailand, but it's her first game. You can maybe give her credit there. I mean, that's fine. It's not like Rodman was necessarily that much older. I think Rodman's like 19, maybe even 20, and Rodman was able to kind of get a couple of minutes to get comfortable into the game. So I don't understand why we didn't see Thompson again, because that's kind of what we needed. We needed someone that had this kind of the wherewithal to take a player on and beat them. Because we just did not have that the entire tournament. In the past, we've had Tobin Heath, that's been that kind of player. We definitely missed her, and that really has been kind of the story. We went into this kind of injured, and I know Fox made it seem like we were Brazil or France going into this. I was kind of texting my friend group. I didn't favor us as like a top 5 team coming into this, to be honest, because I actually watched a lot of our warm-ups or friendlies in the last couple years, and we've just, especially versus Europe teams, and it's funny how we didn't beat a Europe team. We drew Netherlands, we just be scoreless versus Portugal, and we weren't able to score on Sweden. And there was like a 3-game stretch last year, friendly stretch where we played England, we played Germany, and we played Spain. We lost all 3. And I remember kind of taking notes about that. I thought our midfield looked off. Now, the one thing to say about that going into the tournament was Julie Ertz wasn't a part of that. And Julie Ertz was maybe our most important midfielder 4 years ago. And Julie Ertz was a fantastic player in this tournament for us as well, but she was played at center back. And I think that ended up hurting us a little bit. And then, so that's kind of getting ahead of myself. We weren't able to score versus Sweden. I didn't think we outplayed Sweden. It almost seemed like Sweden were actually playing for PKs from like the 30th minute on. I wasn't necessarily impressed with them, to be honest. But we definitely missed someone like Roosevelt for that game. I think that maybe showed up. The interesting thing though was our coach, which I'll get to as well. I mean, our coach ended up making 2 subs right before the end of the game. So we brought on Kristen Mewis, who hadn't played a minute the entire tournament, and Kelly O'Hara, who was also coming on cold right before PKs. And so, Mewis, converted hers to be fair to her. But it was also interesting how she went high, and after that, all of a sudden we started going high. Like the Sweden's keeper didn't save Lindsay Horan's PK, but got close, and I think that freaked people out because all of a sudden, we saw Rapinoe, we saw Sophia Smith go high. Just maybe the adrenaline got to them, and they both missed. And we're both actually, I think, had a chance to win it. Sophia Smith had a chance to win it. I think Rapinoe would have as well, because Alyssa Nair saved 3, and nailed her PK as well. And the final save, goal that Sweden scores, I think is so cruel. It's kind of lame for VAR to kind of decide this, but I do. If I was on the opposite end, obviously I'd be saying the opposite. So. That is fair, but I mean, what went wrong here? So that is where we're at. I mean, I kind of teed it off. There are real reasons to be critical of this team, federation, and players, but people blaming this on wokeism because they're so focused on being activists first than soccer players. I think it's superficial bullshit. It's almost like not even worth getting at. I mean, the whole team has been a banner for like the LGBT community or whatever for the last decade. Rapinoe was a star last tournament. She's been every bit the activist the entire time. The issue with Rapinoe is it wasn't her being an outspoken activist and doing stuff outside of football. It was her being 38 years old, to be honest. And she came into the tournament in poor form, and she didn't play many games for her club team. That showed. Her touch was awful the entire tournament. She looked slow. She looked like a 38-year-old, to be honest. And and she was played over someone like Thompson, who I think that was where the coach kind of messed up. And that kind of goes into the second point. We were younger and less experienced. I mean, the front 3 hadn't necessarily played together. Someone on the option was Alyssa Thompson, who I think is 18. I don't think. She was getting caps when she was still in high school, like earlier in March. So I think she basically just turned 18. I don't think she's close to being 19. Trinity Rodman is 19 or 20. I guess she's like the experienced vet here. And Sophia Smith is 22. It's not like I think this is her first World Cup as well. So I mean, it was kind of a changing of the guard kind of moment. We saw that a little bit in the Olympics, but we really saw that show up here as well. And I thought we were imbalanced. I mean, Sophia Smith is a 9 for her club from Portland. Lynn Williams is kind of a 9, or I guess she kind of plays as like a second forward or a second striker. Rodman kind of is the same. Morgan is a 9/false 9. We lacked creative wingers that were comfortable at getting out wide, but really comfortable at taking players on, beating them, or being clever when the space was limited. Sophia Smith was able to, when the space was there, to able to kick a ball and beat someone and then get a cross off. Lynn Williams, when she came on, was kind of the same. Rodman had a little bit more creative spark to her, but still, it seemed like this wasn't necessarily her natural position, and we struggled to create chances all tournament, to be honest. And I think that that's where we miss someone like Tobin Heath. But speaking of injuries, the big one was Becky Sauerbaum, who I mentioned how Rapinoe being 38, she's like 38 or 37 as well. And I think it's kind of a problem that they don't have someone that's ready enough to replace like a 38-year-old, which gets kind of to the player pool. But what happened is that moved Ertz out of midfield into center back, and I thought our midfield really suffered from that. Sullivan and Sonnet just weren't nearly good enough on the ball to me, and the midfield was a weakness all tournament, and that really showed. The coach, I do think is an issue, but overall, I think my main fear is outside of a few players. I thought we lacked a real technical ability in a way that I can't remember our women's side suffering from. Just collecting passes, turning with the ball, threading passes through lines, handling a press, handling PKs. I thought we were really poor. We were poor. We were poor also in pressing to win the ball back. I thought everything was disjointed and unorganized. And that kind of gets to the coach, Blatko. I have in the minutes Minnie Berhalter here, which is maybe unfair, but I don't know. It's weird lineups all tournament. I played veterans over players I thought more deserving. Like Morgan and Rapinoe, but really Morgan. Everyone's been going at Rapinoe. Morgan was poor this tournament, especially, and I think that harmed Sophia Smith. I don't think we utilized Sophia Smith, playing her out wide as much as we did. Sophia Smith, people coming in thought it was going to be her tournament. People thought this was going to be her like coming out to the world kind of moment. People see her as the best number 9 in the world. Apparently, she's been flying in the NWSL for a Portland team. And we just weren't able to necessarily see it, and that is a shame. It also sucks that she did have her chance to like kind of for that star moment, and maybe misplaying her got her confidence down, and she did miss that PK. But there were head scratching decisions all tournament. Another thing he did was he didn't really use a lot of subs. I think we only used one versus the Netherlands. He didn't really do many subs in the Portugal game or in the Sweden game until the very end. So it was just it was bizarre, and it was also bizarre not to see Thompson nearly as much as we should have. Injuries did play a role. I kind of mentioned Sauerbaum, but no Kristen Press, who was important for us 4 years ago. Tobin Heath as well. But there are a couple of strikers that have been doing well as well that maybe would have gotten a look at if not for injuries. So Katerina Marcario, I believe, who isn't actually in the NWSL. I think she's actually in Europe, and she was playing well. And then Mallory Swanson / formerly Mallory Pugh, I think would have offered something in the attack. And apparently Swanson was scoring the most goals for us in the lead up to this. In that little She Believes Cup, she had something like 4 goals and maybe even 7 over the last 2 seasons, leading the team. So obviously, we struggled to put the ball in the net, so that there would have been maybe a solution there. But again, injuries. So the question really going forward is this a blip? Is this just we're allowed to have blips? France and Brazil don't win every single year on the men's side, but I do think this has been a warning sign that we can't just show up and physically dominate teams anymore. The world, I do believe, has caught up. Maybe dare say past us on the technical side. Watching Spain, France, Japan, England, Netherlands just kind of move the ball, I think is eye opening. Not Colombia, just compared to the way we played. And I think our preparation for this was weird. We had that She Believes Cup. We had some weird friendlies where we would play, 2 teams kind of back to back, like within like 2 or 3 nights with each other. Where we just, I remember there was someone like Nigeria that we smoked like 9-0, and then we played them again, and I think we will beat them like 3-0. But it was just that stuff was just not really needed. We did play 3 European heavyweights 3 times in a row last year, and we lost all 3 in England, Spain, and Germany. And that kind of got me thinking that we've been poor versus European teams. I think we played Wales or like an Ireland team in the warm up to the World Cup. Another European team. It's not necessarily a European giant, and we struggled in that game as well until Sophia Smith got like two goals late. But And I don't think it's a coincidence that we struggled versus Portugal, we struggled versus Netherlands, and ultimately we lose to Sweden. So that is that preparation. I think was can be up for debate. I'm curious if it's an NSWL problem. Because you look, it's not the same blueprint anymore. I mean, the Women's Champions League now exists with PSG, Lyon, Wolfsburg, Barca, Madrid. The Women's Super League English teams, they all seem to have clubs that, at a minimum, rival the best teams in talent that we have, and I do feel like that's new. We're so used to having the cream of the crop in the women's game play in America. We've had Martin for the last 10 years, maybe even longer than that, and I don't feel like that's the case anymore. It's just so that could be something going forward. I mean, is it a development thing? Is the pay-to-play travel model that's hurt the men's side, where we've kind of shrunk the player pool, is that finally showing up on the women's side? We didn't have the best Olympics either. So this is this is off two back-to-back World Cups in a row. You're allowed to have a generation kind of switch off. Cycles aren't forever. And this team did win 2 World Cups in a row, to be fair. So they were allowed a little setback, but it does feel the world is catching up. And so if we don't adjust a little bit here, this could become more of a thing where our women's side start to kind of reflect a little bit more on what the men's side have been looking like. And that is a fear, to be honest. And a lot of people think the men's side, that's hogwash, because the men's side are starting to look a little bit better. But it's not because of what we've done in this country. It's because we've gone out and recruited players that have been developed outside of this country. In Musa, and Balogun, and Sergio Dest, and others. So I do think that there are some warning signs here. And it's not just us. I mean, it's been a wake up call for Germany, who have failed to advance to the knockouts. Maybe for the first time, Brazil, Argentina, Canada. As well. I mean, Jamaica's the last standing CONCACAF federation, which is kind of surprising. And they advanced out of a group of France and Brazil, which is incredible stuff. And to be honest, it really has been a World Cup in a way that we don't always see on the men's side. This hasn't been Euros 2.0. Morocco's women joined their men in reaching the knockouts, though they did kind of get smashed today by France. Nigeria made it to the knockouts. South Africa. Colombia, Jamaica, Japan, and Australia. So I mean, it hasn't been just Euros 2.0 with a random say Argentina and Brazil, like we so often see on the men's side. And I do think that's great. I do think the game is growing, and especially for the longest time, it seemed the women's side has struggled for funding, and it seems other federations are starting to address that, and you're starting to see kind of dividends to that. I mean, as far as the rest of the outlook for the tournament goes, I think the most impressive teams that for me have been England, Spain, Japan, and France. And that said, Australia getting Kerr back makes them a little bit more interesting as well. And England thought they lost Keira Walsh to a bad knee injury. It turns out it's not nearly as bad as feared and could return. That could really help them out. But they also lost maybe the best player of the tournament, arguably so far, in Lauren James, Reece James's sister. It's been her or Spain's Bon Mati that I think have impressed me the most. And Lauren James got a red card for stomping on a leg, and she'll miss the next round versus Colombia, who've been a fun surprise in their own right, at Germany's expense, to be honest. Who advanced, I think, today in their knockout game thanks to a goal from Lucinda Caicedo. But I didn't mention Sweden in that group. That's impressed me, because, to be honest, I haven't really been impressed with them. I think what's funny is their style of play, though, I do think suits them versus Japan. Because Japan did beat Norway kind of comfortably, but towards the end, Norway started just kind of hoofing balls into a box, and it seemed like Japan did have a height difference, and Norway tried to exploit it, and they got close. They got close a couple of times to making it a little bit more interesting, and that really is Sweden's bread and butter. To be honest, is getting balls crossed in and being really good on set pieces, and so it is possible that could really show up. Japan has maybe, I said actually player of the tournament. Another player for that honor is Japan's Miyazano. wait, is that did Japan have the leading goal scorer? And I think her name is Miyazato. She's been a lot of fun to watch as well. She'll be someone to definitely watch for Sweden. Um, and I do like the look of France. They kind of play two strikers up top. They're real strong in the air and really good at bodying defenders off them in Lesamer and Diani. But they get host Australia next game with Sam Kerr potentially coming back and playing. So France's Renard versus Kerr could be matchup of the whole tournament. And in Australia did beat Denmark. I thought Denmark actually started the stronger team in that game, but they couldn't finish, and they gave up a cheap one to Australia, just having a quick counter behind them, thanks to a terrific ball by Mary Fowler. Mary Fowler has been a really good player for Australia this tournament. A Man City player who's I think 20, who's looked very very creative and very very good as well. And it was a meaningless game, but I think back in June or maybe even earlier, it might have been in April. Australia and France did play each other in kind of a warm-up friendly where Australia did win 1-0. So we'll see if that has anything anything to do with this. I mean, we do have a fun knockout rounds. It does kind of suck that all these games are on at like 5 a.m. or even like 3 a.m. in some cases. But if you have DVR, it's worth it to kind of DVR it. I mean, it has been some good football. I've thoroughly enjoyed the tournament and look to enjoy the rest of it. And so that's the women's side, and we'll kind of move on to the Community Shield with Arsenal beating Man City. I say that in jest a little bit because it was 1-1. Arsenal did get the goal kind of very late to make it 1-1. But to be fair, I thought Arsenal were the better team. Stats don't necessarily show that, but just Man City, it seemed like didn't even want to play the game until maybe like the 60th minute, to be honest. The first goal comes from Cole Palmer, and then I don't know if they gave it to Trossard. It was really an Akanji own goal, but Trossard, I guess, Trossard's shot is on target, so I think he should be credited. And then Arsenal beat them in PKs. But I think for the match recap, the big talking point going into this game, I think, was people kind of looking back at how Man City just dominated Arsenal at the Etihad, and people were kind of wondering, well, what's changed? And the main thing, I think, was everyone was kind of putting the blame on Rob Holding being played, and this time they had Saliba, and I do think that showed up. City not having Kevin De Bruyne showed up as well, but Arsenal also played this game differently, in my opinion. They didn't high press like mad, where they exposed themselves in the center like they did at the Etihad. Haaland didn't have nearly as much space. Didn't have really hardly any touches at all. I think he had 13. And he didn't want to have anything to do with Saliba. There were a couple chances for him to take Saliba on, and Haaland decided against it. So Saliba not playing that game maybe did show up. Rex was big on that after the game and even before. He didn't fancy Arsenal's chances for City simply because of not having Saliba and having Holding, and he was right on that. So that'll be interesting to see this season if they can keep Saliba healthy. Maybe Arsenal win the title last year, and there's no reason why they couldn't maybe be favorites to do it this year. City have been weird this transfer window. Then again, there's still a lot to happen, and City have lost someone, a big player like Gundogan, and they look different when Kevin De Bruyne doesn't play. Pep's not going to want to necessarily want to hear that, and Kevin De Bruyne, as good as he is, he's coming off a pretty bad hamstring injury. I thought he looked tight when he actually did come on and play. In this game as well. So that'll be something to watch about. I mean, how important is this game really? I think, from mental edge, it maybe helps Arsenal, get one over. It maybe installs a little bit of belief, but Man City have lost this tournament to Liverpool. They lost to Leicester City and won the league both times. In fact, actually, there's a bit of a curse for those teams. Leicester didn't have a good season that following year after winning the Community Shield. Neither did Liverpool. So hopefully that doesn't give Arsenal bad jiu-jitsu. We'll have to see. But another thing, it was it was different a feel for how Arsenal played. And I thought it was different how Pep kind of lined up as well. He'd been doing this kind of weird, strange, back three. He'd been playing Stones and kind of midfield inverted. We didn't see that a ton this game. Stones really was a traditional center back with Diaz. Walker and Akanji were traditional fullbacks, to be honest. And the few times when Stones did kind of creep up a little bit into midfield, Walker was doing well to kind of stay back. But it seemed like the way Gundogan was able to go forward and kind of venture off and to do so much work without the ball is not that's not what Kovacic offers. Kovacic was kind of staying kind of next to Rodri. They were almost playing two sixes, and that was the reason why City really were just awful to watch on the eye in that first 30 minutes or so. And that kind of gets us started because the first 20 minutes really were dull. Arsenal were kind of setting off City, and City were playing 130 passes side to side with their defenders and keepers on the halfway line. Jeremy kind of texted me that he thinks it's a worrying sign that football is going in a way where everything is about winning that first phase of possession or first phase buildup. And if a team isn't going to necessarily, care if you're playing, all these, side to side passes, there's a lot of time to kind of kill the game off. Because the whole idea of doing that buildup is to bait teams to go forward to you, so you can exploit space in behind. And Arsenal weren't falling for it. And City weren't necessarily able to make any of that possession really pay off. There were a couple chances here. I mean, Man City did have like a half chance when Akanji made a run down the wing, sent a really good ball in, and Ben White was able to win the header, beat Alvarez. There was a chance for Rodri where Partey had a heavy touch. Partey had a good game, but this was kind of a mistake where Rodri did to try a low shot from 25 yards out. It took a little bit of deflection, I think, on Rice, so it's spinning towards the near post. And I do think Ramsdale's beaten. But I think that was in like the 13th minute, and then a chance didn't come until the 25th for Arsenal, and Arsenal did have maybe the two best chances at least in the second half. I mean, at least in the first half, maybe in the game, both falling to Kai Havertz. So I mean, it is a good save by Ortega, but this is, I think, the most interesting play from Arsenal's perspective is because of the shape to start this move. So Rice drops really deep to get the ball, basically playing as a center back. Gabriel goes wide to become the left or the right center back. No, the left center back, and then Saliba is the right center back. And Partey is ahead as the lone target in the middle. But what this does is there's space down the wing for Saliba to get the ball and carry it, because both White and Saka have kind of run down that wing to kind of bring defenders with them. So that kind of leaves space for Saliba to carry. And then what happens here is Odegaard runs towards the ball, and Grealish has no idea what to do. So he follows Odegaard. He leaves Ben White to follow Odegaard. So he loses track of Ben White. And because of this, Akanji now has to deal with Saka and Ben White. Saka does a really good job to stay near. Ben White does a really good job to stay on the wing. And Odegaard or someone gets Ben White the ball to get him the ball down the wing, and Akanji tries to recover. And Ben White does a really good job to cut inside to beat Akanji, and has a really good square ball that Havertz. The only thing is it's kind of behind Havertz, so he does a good job to actually control this and get the shot off. So it is awkward here. This isn't the one that I think people are going to really go at him for. But it was a chance, and he did force a really good leg save by Ortega. To be fair, and then Martinelli had a follow up that kind of blocked by John Stones. But you saw how Rice dropping deep will give teams fits if Arteta does play Rice and Partey together, and it was good to see Ben White get a little bit more advanced, get a little forward. And he had a couple good balls. To be fair, to good runs and good crosses, and so this was pretty exciting to kind of see, because Arsenal are going to look a little different, and this is going to be a reason why. Xhaka doesn't play this way. Xhaka was kind of doing kind of like the Gundogan thing for City last year. He was really good at making kind of runs off the ball, kind of being a number into the box, kind of being a late guy. Or he did have good defensive work rate, but he wasn't necessarily a guy that would show deep to help with buildup. And this was something where Rice and Partey were kind of switching on and off. So that was kind of interesting to see as well. But the big chance came in the 39th minute. So Arsenal moved the ball around well. They find Odegaard free in some space, and he looks up and plays a wonderfully rated pass to Saka, making a timed run to get behind Akanji. Again in the City penalty area, and then Saka squares the ball to Havertz, and Havertz, he doesn't really fluff the shot, but he doesn't get the best power on it, and it really is straight at Ortega. So Ortega, it makes the save easier than maybe it should have been. I do think Kai Havertz needs to bury that. If he's going to play as the main striker, he needs to bear chances like this. This is why City were kind of going at him. And then there was a chance at halftime where Rodri tried to chip Ramsdale halfway line, kind of doing what happened with Onana. It didn't come off, but it was close. But the halftime thoughts was no Kevin De Bruyne, no Gundogan, no Foden. No fun. No one was really looking to play a ball in behind to Haaland. There was a reason maybe he had. I don't even think he had a touch in the 30 until 32 minutes into the game, to be honest, and he only finished with 13. Man City had like 85% of the ball, and I want to say like 82 of it. 2% of it was just them kind of playing in their own half and halfway line. There was no penetration with their possession. And then we get to a chance in the 60th minute for Arsenal. Rice overhits the bar or overhits a shot over the bar, but he does well in everything here except for the shot, obviously. But again, you saw how Rice maybe this would have been something that Xhaka would have done. A lot of people thought when when Arsenal brought Rice and Havertz to the club, the idea was going to be maybe try Havertz in the Xhaka role. And maybe try Rice almost in the party role, and sell Party, and it looks like they're maybe going to hang on to Party, and if so, I think that's good for them. That's good for them to one in case something happens to Party, you have a ready-made replacement right there to play as a six. But to be honest, in this game showed that they can play together. They seem to have a very good understanding, and they haven't really played together, to be honest, in preseason for this being really their first game to kind of do this. They had a really good understanding of when one drops deep, one goes forward, and it kept the shape always pretty good. And Man City didn't necessarily struggle or force them into a lot of mistakes. So that's going to be something to maybe watch this season. The game did change and come to life after Man City made some changes. So Kevin De Bruyne came on, Phil Foden came on for Jack Grealish. Grealish was just ugh. Every single time I watch him play, I know he does well to keep the ball, and he's got good ball retention. That's fine. He draws fouls, but as an attacking winger, he just doesn't do enough for me. And then Cole Palmer came on, and what that did is that moved. He came on for Mateo Kovacic, and what that did is that moved Bernardo Silva back into more of a central midfielder, kind of next to Rodri. And that is really where City started to groove a little bit again. Bernardo Silva can maybe do the things that Gundogan was offering them last season. So it'll be interesting to see if Pep tries to maybe do that more than necessarily try Bernardo Silva out on the wing. And frankly, Cole Palmer kind of does what Mahrez was offering. It does feel like City are a little short there, but we'll get to that later. There was a chance that came to Cole Palmer. So Kevin De Bruyne gets the ball, kind of feeds the ball slightly behind Phil Foden, top of the box. Foden does an amazing touch here to just control the ball and quickly find Palmer to his right side. And then Palmer does well to get the shot off, but it's blocked just in time by Timber recovering. And that's worth saying as well because we'll get to Palmer's goal. Timber wasn't on the field at this point. But in this one little moment, you saw much better attacking intent from City, and you saw Foden do what I don't think Jack Grealish would have done. And so that was a good switch, I think, in my opinion. Foden's going to have a big season this year. That'll be worth following. We'll get to the goal. It is Cole Palmer, and Man City gave them the warning. Arsenal didn't heed it. But really, this happens from Phil Foden, kind of like 60 yards upfield, doing an incredible. He did what Jack Grealish wasn't doing. Jack Grealish was basically just staying on the touchline and staying in the same area all game. Phil Foden actually came to the ball, and Partey tried to recognize it, tried to recover on him, and Foden kind of did him with a really clever turn. So he gets behind Partey, and then he's got all the space in the middle of the field to dribble and carry the ball upfield. Rice can't close down on him quick enough, though he does a good job. To be fair, he makes up a lot of ground, and he does get close. I mean, he does deflect this pass. But the unfortunate thing for Arsenal is it still gets to Palmer, or it gets to Tierney. Tierney tries to do just kind of like one time it away, and what Tierney's kind of deflected hit finds Kevin De Bruyne. De Bruyne just kind of heads it back to Palmer again. And then from there, Palmer squares up and curls it right into the far corner. Ramsdale, no chance. But I don't think... it's kind of weird. I don't necessarily think it's insignificant that this happens when Tierney's on the field versus Timber. But Kyle Walker does a really good job of quickly making an overlap run. And that freezes Tierney. He has no idea what to do because if he tries to close down on Palmer, you can easily he easily has Kyle Walker for an easy square ball onside, and Walker can pick his spot to kind of place it. So or just Arsenal kind of undone here a little bit, and instead that little hesitation allowed Palmer to kind of get the space to open up his foot, and it was a beautiful curler. And Palmer had a good Euros, U21 Euros for England. So selling Mahrez, they haven't brought anyone else in. Maybe we're going to see Cole Palmer a little bit more this season if they don't bring anyone else in. So we'll see. And then in the chance, I got a couple chances here in the 82nd minute. It's Man City Foden and then Rodri. Two great Ramsdale saves back to back. To be fair to him, I mean this is where the game probably should have been won. White has a poor touch. Alvarez pounces. He carries the ball into the Arsenal box. He feeds Phil Foden, and Phil Foden. This is one place where Saliba has like a last second slide tackle, and he doesn't necessarily get the ball. One, he doesn't. So he doesn't get contact with Foden. That's big. But two, it's close enough where it forces Foden to take a second touch. So he can maybe he moves it a little bit more to the side, and that kind of allows Ramsdale to maybe better his angle to kind of get closer. And Foden can't necessarily squeeze it past him from 8 yards out. So Saliba does an amazing job here to maybe Ramsdale has a save, but Saliba gets the assist in my opinion. And then the second one is Rodri on a corner kick. It's a near post header. I think this is sneaking in, so it's another really good glove save by Ramsdale. And then in extra time, there was a small chance for Arsenal where Saka kind of overheats a ball to Vieira. But it was great. It was great setup play by Trossard. Trossard had come on, and Smith Rowe had come on at this point, and they had really good play on the touchline to keep the ball in. And then it was a really quick 3-ball, I think, by Partey to kind of get Arsenal into City's penalty area. And the pass was on for Vieira, but Saka just kind of overhits it. But Arsenal do make it count a little bit later. I think it was in like the 99th minute. So we did get a little extra added time, which is going to be something that they said is going to happen. I was watching a championship game, I think the Southampton game, and they had something like 100. They had 10 plus minutes of added time. So that's going to be, we're going to have longer games this year. Actually, some players have actually already spoken out against that, but I'm in favor of it. The ball was in play for only like 55, 60 minutes in some games last season. So that's good to see. Subs kind of take some time, and I don't know. I'm a little bit in favor of. Though if you are recording games next this coming season, you might need to do that extra, add 10, 15 minutes, whatever. But anyways, we do get the final goal we do get the tying goal by Arsenal's Trossard. There's a corner kick, and the deflection kind of goes off. I mean, the ball is kind of recycled after the corner kick. And then Trossard does really well to kind of fake the early cross. He fools Alvarez, and then tries a speculative attempt that kind of banks off Akanji's knee. There's nothing Akanji can do, and wrong foots Ortega. There's nothing really Ortega can do. The problem happened by Alvarez falling for the fake shot or fake early cross. But it's clever by Trossard. Someone maybe, because the game really is about to end. Maybe you think, someone just kind of get into the box as quick as possible. You don't think to maybe try to kind of fake something and to get it on a different foot. Trossard to me has maybe been Arsenal's standout player in the preseason, and it is interesting to see what the plan is for him this season. I can't imagine it's just to be Martinelli's kind of backup player. They are in Champions League, so there are going to be more games for Trossard, more important games for Trossard to play, because you can't just overrun Martinelli like they did last season. Or Saka, to be honest. I thought both were kind of looked a little tired towards the end of the season. But I mean, Trossard to me is maybe the best finisher on even if Jesus is healthy. So that is worth saying as well. I mean, to kind of the tactic notes, I didn't think Bernardo Silva and Grealish on the wings worked again. That was kind of an issue towards the end of the season. They ended up winning a treble last season. So I did have egg on my face, kind of saying doubting that all year, but they were also exceptional in the middle of the field with Kevin De Bruyne and Gundogan, and you're missing Gundogan now. So I don't necessarily know if that necessarily is going to be enough. And then without the ball, Man City were basically in a 4-4-2 defense, and with Arsenal, I did think it was interesting how in early build-up it seemed like Declan Rice was the guy to kind of drop into deep, with Partey a little bit more advanced, more times than not. I mean, sometimes you did see Partey and him kind of switch. But I did think that was kind of interesting to see, and I thought for the most part Declan Rice was man marking Rodri, and Odegaard was kind of doing well to mark the second guy in midfield. it was only really Havertz ahead. Arsenal were not high pressing. And I think City were struggling with that. City had all this possession in their middle third or at the halfway line, but Arsenal didn't really care. City were struggling to kind of get that second phase of possession in. So that was interesting to kind of see. It'll be interesting to see if other teams try to solve that. Now again, this is all because City didn't get that early goal. If City gets that early goal, this all changes. You have to play differently. But the first takes, I guess, this was a slog of the game until maybe the 70th minute when it kind of when City brought on some changes and Arsenal looked a little bit better. It was interesting to see the 2-6s in Partey and Rice. It was likewise the 2-6s in Kovacic and Rodri. Not necessarily maybe for the same reasons. It was maybe a little bit more pessimistic from City's perspective. But another player that kind of impressed was another signing in Julian Timber. He's been given a chance. He's playing in the Zinchenko kind of role. We imagine that's going to be Zinchenko's role when he gets back, but I think he's maybe a better defender. And it's possible Arteta could play Timber on the right side if he needs to instead of Ben White. So they didn't have fullback depth last season like this because going from Zinchenko to Tierney was an issue for Arsenal, and they did drop points in a lot of those games. And they just, it seemed like they struggled, where having someone like Timber, that's not going to be an issue this season. So there's a lot of reason to think that Arsenal are going to be different. But it's hard to say Arsenal haven't improved. Now, the mystery is, how is Havertz going to fit into this? They've lost Jesus to some kind of injury preseason, and he's going to miss the start of the season. Is Havertz going to be the guy to lead their attack? That could be interesting because he did do a good job to create some chances, and he is fantastic in the air. But he also, he this is what he was known for at Chelsea. He was known for getting in good positions and not necessarily being able to finish. And that was what Jesus kind of struggled with a little bit last season as well. And it doesn't seem like Arsenal, if this was a chance for Arteta to kind of show that he trusts someone like Nketiah, this proves he really doesn't. To start Havertz over him, we didn't see Havertz play striker all preseason. We saw him kind of playing as like a second striker in some cases, or even in midfield. And I didn't think he looked good in midfield. There was a Man United game that they played where I thought that was a big issue because he didn't seem like he didn't have the defensive awareness to play in midfield, in my opinion. So. We'll see how that necessarily works out. I mean, the stats were, shots were 8 for Man City with 4 on target. 5 though came in the second half for City, and 4 on target. All four shots on target came in the second half. So that's why the changes did make them better. Arsenal was 7 shots and 3 on target. Arsenal weren't necessarily that great. 1 big chance, missed a piece. Ramsdale did have 4 saves. So I did say Man City or Arsenal maybe the better side. After Pep made those changes in the dying minutes, or the last 20 minutes or so, City were the better team, to be honest. And it was interesting to see how most of those chances came after Haaland had gone off. And that's not necessarily to say City are better without Haaland. City are just better with Foden and Kevin De Bruyne on the field. The possession was 55 to City to Arsenal's 45, 48, 52 though in the second half. So Arsenal were a little bit better at getting possession in the second half. Man City were maybe being a little bit more adventurous too, so maybe they're losing the ball a little bit more. Passing was 522, 88% for City, and Arsenal 428, 88% as well. Crossing though was interesting. Crosses was only 2 for 14 for Man City, and 2 for 13 for Arsenal. You've got Havertz cross the ball into him. You got Haaland cross the ball into him. So I mean, to get on with the Arsenal side, the lineups, no Jesus, so we saw Havertz instead as a false 9, and Declan Rice and Partey kind of played together. For the Arsenal take, it took a while for you to get the goal. I think it did come like the 99th minute. You get it to PKs, but I did feel like they were the better team, at least until Pep made his changes. City come alive in the final 15 minutes after a few playmakers came on. Ramsdale with a couple clutch saves. But it did feel like, Arsenal created maybe the better chances and just Havertz misfired, and that kind of gets to Havertz. So is this a case where you look at this as Havertz did a good job. He had good movement into the box. He had actually, when he came to drop deep and do link-up play, he did a real good job to hold on to the ball. I mean, he is a big body. So is this a case of you like the idea of him getting looks and you think eventually that'll change? Or is this a warning sign because you've had maybe 2 years to see him at Chelsea kind of do the same stuff? And this is the reason why Chelsea fans kind of hated him all those years at their club. I don't want to say it's a fire on the fire alarm sale warning sign, but it did kind of make the eyebrows raise. I guess I'll say that. And the Jesus injury does highlight this a little bit more. So are they done? Are they done with their business, or do they maybe try to look to bring in a finisher? Um, because I thought maybe Havertz was brought in to kind of be a little bit more of a midfielder or playmaking 10. And so should they sell Balogun or maybe keep him, or it doesn't feel like he trusts Nketiah, so maybe now's the time to actually sell Nketiah as well, to try to bring in some funds and to find a finisher, because this could be an issue. Now, Ivan Toney isn't going to be able to play until January. Do you maybe take a shot on him now? I don't, my buddy Jammer's not going to want to hear that as a Brentford fan, but to be honest, like it does feel like this is an area where if it's a 75th minute and they need a goal, it still feels like Arsenal might struggle a little bit here. Or do you try playing Trossard in this spot? While Trossard is like 5'8", you don't think of him as a traditional striker. He is probably their best finisher. Um, I think he can do the same things that Jesus was offering. Jesus has fantastic hold-up ability. I don't necessarily know if Trossard can necessarily do that, but I'd like to maybe see it tried. We did see him play a little bit more in the middle of the field versus Barcelona and had two fantastic finishes. So other than that, I don't really know what you try. I mean, Trossard, it is fitting to me that Trossard does get the goal to get them to PKs, because I thought he was maybe the stand-up player in the preseason. So, and again, I don't really know what the deal is for him going forward. So we'll see if that maybe goes into Arteta's plans. And then I have Ramsdale as a topic, because he's been up there as mentioned as people have been looking around at Brentford's David Raya. I mentioned Ivan Toney. Brentford are going to hate Arsenal if this happens with Toney, but it does look like they're looking at David Raya. Maybe not necessarily to take Ramsdale's spot, but maybe to kind of improve on where Matt Turner was. It does seem like they've sold Matt Turner to Nottingham Forest. So Brentford's David Raya, I think, is better with his feet than Ramsdale. I think there have been issues where Ramsdale has struggled. Ramsdale has good distribution. I don't think he necessarily is great under pressure. I think we saw that for Southampton. He had a really bad ball. They gave away a goal. That ended up costing them. They ended up tying that game. That was right before the City game, so that maybe kind of hurt their momentum going into the City. So again, no Saliba, no Rob Holding, that kind of factored in as well. But in this game, in the Community Shield game, when he had two fantastic saves, he was fantastic in the PKs. But before it went to all that, in like the 85th minute, he passed the ball right to Kevin De Bruyne in the dying minutes, and nothing came from it. But it was almost messy, and he had a really bad first touch when Haaland nearly pressed him in the first half. Haaland nearly kind of got this to go deflected into the goal. So there's still some nervy moments a little bit for him, but despite that, again, he was fantastic in the shootout and did have some big saves. So I don't know what necessarily the idea is, but that'll be a topic to follow going forward. And then I put down Julian Timber and Rice. So a little under the radar is maybe this signing, but he's given Arsenal some real fullback depth again. And again, a game without Zinchenko, you didn't really notice. And then Tierney came on and they conceded. Then I mean, it's kind of harsh to kind of go with Tierney, but it just that happened. And so, and then Declan Rice, he costs 120 million. Is that worth it? If it wins you the league, I say yes. It does feel like him and Partey, if they play together, they're going to be also a lot harder to play through the middle of the field. So that's worth kind of saying as well. I don't think he's had the best preseason, but he was really good in this game. His recovery defense is exceptional. I mean, there was a time when he sprinted back and made up like 30 yards on Bernardo Silva and just kind of pushed him off the ball in open space. that chance when the Arsenal Man City get their goal. He nearly made up the same kind of ground on Phil Foden. He does get a deflection on that ball, so he's going to make Arsenal a lot harder to play through in the middle of the field. That is worth saying as well. And I do like the idea that they've kept Partey, and not just sold him. They haven't done what Liverpool have done, where they were like, oh, we'll just kind of sell Henderson and Fabinho and bring in just one defensive midfielder. Because if something happens to Rice, then you have Partey, or the opposite. You've got some backup issues, so it gives them some variables there to kind of switch it up a little bit. And then for Man City without Kevin De Bruyne and Foden and Gundogan is not a fun Man City team. Grealish and Bernardo Silva offered nothing. Kind of mentioned that as well, and they missed creators in that first half. The topics and debates here is there've been a few chances now to see Man City without these players, and what should we think of them? They haven't looked great in the preseason game. They didn't look good versus Aston Villa. Atletico Madrid, where they have played like 8 or 9 starters in that game. They haven't had Kevin De Bruyne for any of this preseason, to be fair. But how much are you How much are you relying on him in that instance? And then again, they've lost the Community Shield before, and it's not been an issue. But it does feel like maybe this is something different. Haaland's lack of involvement, I do think is worrying a little bit here, because it's not just. I keep mentioning De Bruyne not being able to play, but the main thing that it was kind of worth noticing is Haaland's goals kind of did dry up a little bit after Pep made the change to be super, super defensive minded. Playing X number of defenders, 6 defenders on the field at the same time. It felt like the idea was to maybe starve Haaland a little bit, where as long as you can be a little bit more secure at the back. And to be fair, that is what won him the treble and won him the Europe. The Champions League that he's wanted so much. So I don't know. Maybe this is kind of the way the game is going. Just don't concede. It's weird to hear Pep ball being like that, but it does feel like that is where his mindset is. But we'll see. It's not just Kevin De Bruyne. It feels like Phil Foden needs to have a big season for them this season. There are some roster changes, and where does Foden fit into these roster changes? Does he finally replace Grealish, or maybe he's the idea to kind of play on the wing instead? What do we see with Cole Palmer? And I think the jury is out for Kovacic. He's not going to be the same player that Gundogan was. Kovacic is going to be fine in possession. He's going to be fine defensively, but he's not, and he can carry the ball. So he's a good dribbler, but he's not going to make runs off the ball and be kind of a guy to make a clever run in the box and score the way Gundogan was. And so, maybe Bernardo Silva can do that, but that was a secret to Man City in the last few years. It was Gundogan being able to offer that, and they haven't replaced him yet. So what does that do? The transfer business has been weird. It's Kovacic and Gvardiol. We didn't see Gvardiol in this game, but again, that's another kind of defender that can play as a fullback if needed, where you need to play 6 or 7 fullbacks on, or center backs on. Maybe you bring him in. You can play Stones in the midfield again. Again, you imagine that's going to be better for them defensively. And it's worth saying that them bringing Akanji on last season is maybe why they won the Champions League as well. So maybe there's still some time for City to kind of do some business, and we'll see if they do, because I do feel like at the moment right now I feel like they've gotten worse. So we'll get to kind of do a quick top 4 preview. Let's see how we're doing for time. Not too bad. Okay. So our mini preview, we'll go with the top 4 contenders. We'll start with Man City. So the transfer business end, they've got Kovacic, Gvardiol, Nathaniel Bustos, and it looks like they've got João Cancelo back on loan, though it doesn't seem like he's in Pep's cards. And they've lost Riyad Mahrez, Benjamin Mendy. We don't have to get into him. It makes sense why they've done that. And Ilkay Gundogan. And so, something I'm pondering about is when you look at it's now when you look at these like top teams, you need to look at squads as in terms of points. What is the max or min point range you view a team? And if anything, I feel like Man City have regressed. So we'll see if that'll be enough. Arsenal are going to be different as well. So we'll see. It does feel like a lot of teams in in the EPL have improved a little bit. So it's going to be harder and harder to keep getting that 90+ point range. But we'll see. But what's funny is, as far as being a Champions League contender, I feel like they've improved. They've improved their chances. Getting someone like Gvardiol, if something happens to Stones doesn't necessarily have the best injury. They've been lucky with Ruben Diaz for the last couple seasons. He's had some injury issues. Um, they've got rocks there where they can plug and place now with really quality center backs that can also kind of play. Gvardiol can play on the left. He can do like a fake fullback job that Laporte has shown he can do. And it seems like what they've done is they've replaced Laporte with Gvardiol. So I do think that makes them stronger in the Champions League, but we'll see. And then we'll get to Arsenal. Arsenal have brought in Declan Rice, Julian Timber, Kai Havertz. Looks like they got Cedric Suarez back from loan. They had Pepe. I didn't realize Pepe and Tavares were still on the roster sheet. They're probably about to go out. And Balogun is kind of waiting in the cards, it seems. And then out, it looks like they're about to sell Matt Turner. They've sold Austin Trusty, another American that was on the team sheet. He was really good in the championship for, I think, Birmingham. I think they've sold him to an EPL club. I forget. It's either Forest or is it Luton Town? Might be Sheffield. I think it is Sheffield. They've lost Granit Xhaka, and then Maitland Niles and Pablo Mari are out. And so the jury will be out for Arsenal. Is this going to be, because you feel like everything that he's done is to beat Man City to a title, and they do seem strong. It does feel like the only issue is, again, if it comes down to having to get a goal in the dying 10 minutes, who do you go to? But we'll see. We'll see how this works out for them. I mean, they've got. If it doesn't work out in this transfer window, it doesn't feel like they're ever going to be necessarily a lot of points away from City either way. So maybe they can rectify it in the January transfer window. We'll have to see. For Newcastle, we've got Harvey Barnes in, which is interesting. It seems like they've moved St. Maximin out, and they brought in Harvey Barnes, who has fantastic numbers. I didn't realize he had as good end product as he showed. He was a good player for Leicester. It'll be interesting to see if this works, though, as it does feel he's kind of he's a one tool kind of player where he gets the ball from the left side, he cuts on to kind of get it on his right foot to kind of cut in and score. It doesn't feel like he necessarily tries to. He also kind of shows the ball, in my opinion. He doesn't necessarily seem like he makes a lot of direct runs, though he does make good runs into the box, as fair. And it does feel like, maybe when Almiron was kind of Almiron had such a fantastic season for them to start the season, he kind of slowed up a little bit towards the end. They maybe were struggling a little bit to find that elsewhere. And it felt like they were trying Isaac and Callum Wilson at the same time. That was interesting, but it does feel like Harvey Barnes at least gives him another option. It doesn't seem like they think Anthony Gordon is going to be that kind of player. So this does make sense in that respect. I mean, the other signing here is the wild card. It's Sandro Tonali, who is he can kind of do that same thing that I was saying with Rice and Partey, but in a different respect, because it allows maybe Bruno Guimaraes to be a little bit more advanced this time around, where last time it seemed like he really did have to pick his spots to go up. Tonali is really good under pressure, and he's a controller. Now, the reason why I say it's a wild card, that sounds really, really good. And you think, oh, well, what would be the issue? Is it doesn't seem like he was happy to leave AC Milan, leave Italy, to go to Newcastle. So we'll see if that kind of affects him a little bit. If not, this could be Newcastle weren't really far off last year. You imagine if they can keep everyone healthy. I mean, Isaac and Callum Wilson have goals in the boatloads. Newcastle have improved in midfield to me. Their defense was fantastic last season. Now they brought in Livramento as maybe kind of insurance for someone like Kieran Trippier. So Newcastle are interesting again, or at least I think they have a verbal agreement. And it's kind of funny. I was expecting if someone was going to get a Southampton fullback, I would have figured it would have been Kyle Walker-Peters. But Livramento, before his ACL injury, was making headlines for Southampton as well. He was, and he's a young player, so that could be a fantastic signing for them as well. Newcastle again. Newcastle could jump up. I think they finished like third or fourth last season. Newcastle could be more looking into looking above that. Now they do have. How are they going to manage Champions League? We'll have to see. We'll have to see how that works as well, because that'll be more. I want to say more games. It'll be well, yeah. They were only playing once last season, so there'll be more games and more tough games. So we'll have to follow that, and then we'll get to Man United. Man United have spent a lot, and they've made some eye openings with these spending. So brought in Mason Mount, brought in Andre Onana, the fantastic keeper that we saw for Inter in the Champions League final. They brought in Rasmus Højlund, a striker that was at Atalanta, a young Danish striker. He didn't score many goals for them last season. I think he's only got 2 or 3 seasons of senior football. He is young, to be fair to him. And then Johnny Evans. It looks like they've kind of just kind of brought him back for just kind of just center back depth at the time. They've sold Anthony Elanga, Alex Telles, Phil Jones. Maybe that's kind of the idea. You lost a senior center back, so maybe get Johnny Evans in for some leadership. Lost David De Gea, so kind of replaced him with Andre Onana. I lost Axel Twanbanzi, and kind of a center back that was just never really favored. He always kind of went out on loan. And it looks like they've sold Zidane Ekbal. It is interesting to see them sell Anthony Elanga. But, the real thing is Mason Mount is a bit of an eye-opener, because it doesn't seem like it feels like it'll be hard to see how he and Bruno Fernandes fit together, to be honest. It feels like, because they paid like 60, 70 million for him, it feels like Man United made a mistake to not really target someone like Caicedo to kind of play with Casemiro. And then you would have allowed Bruno to be that creative playmaker. And then you still have, if something happens to Bruno, you still have Christian Eriksen. I can't imagine you spent all that money to Mason Mount to bring him in to kind of be a backup to Bruno. And it feels like the times when Mason Mount and Bruno have been played together, it seems like they're kind of cut open. It's kind of too easy. Mason Mount isn't necessarily a wide winger, or someone to cut inside necessarily as much. It does feel like he's mostly a 10. So I mean I'm a little skeptical. I mean, I didn't really want him at Liverpool because of that. I didn't feel like he necessarily fitted the profile. He does have goals on him though. So we'll see. The Andre Onana one is weird, because it's gonna be so much different than David De Gea. This guy takes risk like a FIFA player. And we saw him actually. We saw him chipped from halfway line in one of the friendlies, because he almost starts off in like the 30-yard line, just kind of to kind of be an option, just kind of someone to pass to. He is. It'll be interesting. I think that's kind of the best way to say it. I mean, he's a fantastic keeper, to be fair to him. And Ten Hag knows him. He was the keeper at Ajax when Ten Hag was also there. So that makes sense as well. And then Rasmus Højlund is the interesting thing here is I figured they needed a 9. There was a whole lot riding on Rashford last season. I think Rashford and Casemiro were really the reasons why they got top 4 last season. Bruno had a good year as well, but Rashford kind of had that little purple patch in the middle of the season that helped them. Casemiro helped them in the back. But this allows him to play Rashford a little bit more in his favorite side on the left, where he can cut in, and this gives him a target man. He did only have like 9 goals, but playing in the Serie A can be a little bit different. Atalanta is a high flying attacking side. So it'll be fun to kind of see how he does. It's always fun to see like young talents come into the league. I don't necessarily like Man United improving, because as a Liverpool fan, you see Man United as a team you kind of need to pass. The only thing I would say here is I figured if Man United were going to look at a Serie A player, it would have been maybe Osimhen. I figured it would have cost around the same, but it looks like Napoli has rejected an offer of 130 million. From a Saudi club. So it seems like if he was 130 million, that makes sense why Man United maybe looked elsewhere. So we'll kind of see. Højlund and Holland in the same city. They look similar. One's Danish, one's Norwegian. So you kind of have that, and it'll be interesting to kind of follow. And then we'll move on to Liverpool. I don't want to necessarily go on a massive rant. They have kind of addressed the midfield issues somewhat. So they brought in Alexis McAllister, he's a Rolls Royce of a footballer. And he's looked every bit of it in preseason. And they brought in Dominic Szoboszlai, who basically is like he's what Henderson should have been. He's got a motor on him. He's got goals from outside. He can be creative. He's got in the preseason games. He's had tremendous work rate to run backwards and to stop counterattacks or to. He's been good at pressing. He's been good at winning duels. He's a big body. And then no more Jordan Henderson. He's out in Saudi, kind of sweating it out. No Fabinho. It's interesting to see them sell both of them. They got $60 million for them. But if they haven't replaced them yet, and that means right now there's no senior defensive kind of midfielder in the club, and I think it'll be insane if they go this season without that. They are linked to Lavia. They've kind of put in a couple of bids. They've been rejected. It seems like Southampton have been very firm on the number that they want, and the difference is only like $5 million. So I don't get why they've waited this out, because Klopp said so many times that he's noticed that when he gets players in that don't have a full preseason with him, they struggle a little bit to kind of adapt in the season. And Liverpool are going to go into the season kind of a player or two short, I'd say. And then a bunch of players that they've lost kind of on their feet. They lost to Firmino, that was expected. Milner, Ox, Keita. It seems like they've sold or loaned out Calvin Ramsey, and then Fabio Carvalho. It looks like they sold or they loaned out to. I think they did sell to Leipzig. So he didn't necessarily work out. That was kind of a shame. It seems like his career kind of stalled a little bit. It would have been fun to see him at Fulham last season. But as far as the positives go, they've addressed some midfield issues as far as having legs, recovery, pressing, winning duels, as far as being technical on the ball. The preseason game I watched yesterday, there was so much stuff played on the ground where people were finding guys' feet. It wasn't this hoof nonsense that I had been accustomed to seeing. So that was good. I think both Szoboszlai and Mac have looked good in preseason. Just the issue a little bit is because Liverpool now have outside threats to score from midfield. It's not just them. Harvey Elliott has kind of shown that ability. Curtis Jones has shown that ability. So that's going to open up the attack a little bit more as well. Just the issue for me is all of a sudden, all the issues that they've had in the last 2 seasons in midfield, they now have a center back where the depth is a big concern. And what's funny is they had this before the midfield issue, because the season when Virgil van Dijk got injured, that was the same season that Matip got injured and Gomez got injured, is they started that year with only 3 senior center backs because they sold Dejan Lovren that summer. And so they kind of done the same thing in here where they have Virgil, Konate, and Matip and Gomez, but if something happens to Konate and Gomez, I don't think if something happens to Konate and Virgil van Dijk, I don't necessarily think Matip and Gomez are good enough depth. And another problem here is the way that Liverpool have switched to this almost kind of 3 at the back, a 2-2, and then 3 formation. It's very narrow, and I don't think it's actually hurting their attack a little bit. The idea was to kind of move Trent into this central position because they're struggling for creativity, but you now don't necessarily need that because you've improved the midfield where it almost feels like you can go back to a 4 at the back, where they were playing before, because it seems like what they've done is they've made things. I don't want to say they made things worse, but they're vulnerable in the same way that they were last year, even though they've somewhat addressed some midfield issues. Not having a defensive midfield is going to hurt as well because it does feel like they could be maybe cut open there. But the main thing I'm noticing is in this back 3, it's Robinson. And Robinson doesn't understand how to play this position. Too often I'm seeing him bomb forward and get caught out position where it's Virgil van Dijk having to go out wide to defend someone running at them. I don't really like that either because it doesn't seem like he's comfortable at doing that anymore. Another thing too is on the other side, if a ball is kicked out wide, Konate has to go back and defend that cross. And what that does is that moves Konate, who's fantastic at defending balls in the air, to be a guy to cut off someone trying to cross the ball in. And so when that happens, all a ball needs to do is beat Virgil van Dijk for someone to have fancied their chances over Robinson. I don't think Robinson's good enough in the air So I don't understand if the idea was to stick with this system, why wouldn't you go get a left-footed center back to either play at left center back in a three, kind of benching Robinson, or why not? Well, one, you needed to get a center back in anyways for depth. But why are you sticking with this three at the back kind of system when it seems like that's what everyone's doing? Why not go back to that 4-3-3 when you've addressed the midfield to be able to play with dueling eights again? Or why not go to a 4-2-3-1 where you can play Trent and Robinson kind of as bombing fullbacks again if you have two in a pivot? Um, it is surprising to me. Now again, the squad isn't complete, so that's worth saying as well. I mean, they're linked. It seems like they're linked to a DM, so it seems like they understand they need to do something here. They were linked to Kefram Turam and Mount Kone. It does seem like that's cooled off. I don't understand why they weren't linked to Florentino Luis and out in Benfica or Portugal. But I guess maybe the price point is an issue. I've seen a couple games where Monaco played Arsenal, I think, in a friendly where Yusuf Fofana impressed me. It seems like he can maybe do a job. I feel like they scouted Tchouaméni all those for a full season. You feel like watching all those game tapes, you would have seen his teammate, his Monaco teammate, in Yusuf Fofana. So it seems like they would at least have a folder opened on him. But they were linked to the Paulinho of Fulham. It seemed like there was maybe some kind of agreement about to be done, and then Paulinho got hurt. They're now linked to Andre Fluminense in Brazil, but I don't necessarily know if he's necessarily a six by himself. Now, in a pivot, he'd be fantastic. He'd be like Thiago, from what I've seen, but I don't necessarily know if I'd want him as a lone six in a 4-3-3. And Palace's Decore has been kind of a name kind of thrown around. But I mean, they clearly recognize something because they bid 3 times for Roman Lavia of Southampton. So I have imagined if they bid 3 times, the difference is only a few million. They got 60 million selling Fabinho and Henderson. I imagine that deal finally gets over the line, and then from there, the question becomes, what does Klopp do with this team? Does he stick to what he did at the end of last season? Or does he go back to his tried and true 4-3-3, or maybe try 4-2-3-1? I think a 4-2-3-1 with Gakpo as a 10, with someone like Nunez or Jota ahead of him. I do think that's maybe the best way to play Gakpo. I don't really love Gakpo as a false 9 in a 4-3-3. Anyways, I've kind of mentioned that before, but other than that, it does feel like the squad is a little incomplete. They only have 22 registered players. I think I saw that's the lowest of all teams in Europe. Or the lowest of all teams in the EPL. Chelsea have something like 30 plus by comparison. I think Brighton have 30 plus. Thiago and Bachacic make up that 22 number, and they're both injured. I don't really know where Thiago places in this club. I mean, if you're going to play a double pivot, obviously Thiago with a DM makes sense. But I don't really think Thiago by himself would be a number 6. He did try McAllister as a 6 with Trent Alexander-Arnold last game, and to be honest, the issues weren't really in the midfield. It was more a team fancying, hey, they'll just kick it over the midfield to our high line, and fancy themselves kind of either beating Kanate to a ball, which is not necessarily easy, or basically finding a way to just kind of cross something in. And they conceded they conceded like a really cheap goal yesterday because of that, and they've been really vulnerable all preseason. They've given up a lot of goals. So there is some issues. It seems I mentioned the word transition was thrown around a lot last season. It wasn't really a transition year; it was more of an end of a cycle year. Now they are transitioning, and it seems like they're transitioning from a system that Klopp has played the entire time he's been at Liverpool 4-3-3 to something different. He's kind of seen what Pep's been doing. He's seen what some other clubs have been doing with this 3-back, and at least in possession, and he seems to like it. And it's changed how Trent's played, but it's also changed how Robinson's played. It's changed his role, and it hasn't necessarily. It's made Trent maybe better. I don't think it necessarily has made Robinson better. If you're gonna, it's funny they were linked to someone like Jude Bellingham this entire time. They should have been linked to Levy Colwell. Levy Colwell fixes some of these issues. Someone like Gvardiol. Maybe fixes some of these issues. Expensive, obviously, but it is what it is. You knew not getting Champions League, you had to spend 100 million, and you haven't. The net spend actually after selling Fabinho and Henderson is actually quite low. Again, so we were told that there was this money for Jude Bellingham to kind of put in the bid, and we haven't really seen it yet. That to me says there's money there. The issue is struggling to find players. That shouldn't be an issue as well. Other than that, they have someone like Jarrell Kwanzaa to try, young and not proven. But other than that, I'd say, we haven't seen it yet. I would try Gomez instead of Robinson if you're going to do this three back. So I would do something like Gomez, Virgil, and Kanate, or Kanate on the left side, Gomez on the right side, whichever one Gomez is more comfortable with. I actually think that would actually be the best way to play Gomez. I think Gomez is still a good player. I don't really trust him just being a center back in a two. It seems like he struggles with kind of reading the game. In a three back, it's different. You have Virgil kind of doing the reading of the game, and you've got Gomez to just kind of be someone to go out wide or to be someone to win balls in the air. So I would like to maybe see that. Mac and Trent, I guess, is okay. It does bend Robinson, but I think it's time to maybe do that. If not, you need to stick with a 4-3 and play traditional fullbacks with Trent and Robinson kind of doing what they've been doing. Maybe have Trent learning how to play deeper. Maybe have Trent maybe even try it as kind of a right center back, a little bit how we've seen Reece James kind of play. And you have Robinson always kind of bombing forward to either be a number or to get some crosses in. But other than that, it doesn't seem like Robinson can play this deeper role. He gets forward too often. I don't think he has the positional discipline to stay in place, and he's causing issues. So there's still some fears I have. And then for the attack, I think I prefer Jota over Nunez. To be honest, Jota has looked good in the preseason. He's looked good whenever he's played. To be honest, injuries has been why he hasn't scored as many goals as you would expect. I think Nunez is struggling. I think Nunez has struggled a little bit last year. He did miss a lot of chances last season. He hasn't necessarily looked fantastic in the preseason. He has scored some goals, but he's also missed some chances. And it's a big season for Nunez. It sounds like because last year, if he doesn't really come good, last year's transfer window is going to be an absolute disaster. But still, there's still time. There's still time for him to come good, and it's good to have attacking depth. Anyways, you spent a lot of money for him, but he's not on high wages, to be honest. So, and he seems to have a good work rate. So we'll see. When he comes on, he offers them something different. Is worth saying as well. So it's always good to have that. It does feel like they've replaced Origi with Nunez, but I don't necessarily know if it's necessarily that dramatic. But we'll see. I actually think it's funny. We've seen Gakpo kind of played in midfield a couple of these times. I liked it. I like what Gakpo offers in midfield more than as a striker. It seems like he's really good at dropping for the ball, and he's really good at carrying it. And that actually makes the issue with Robinson even worse because Gakpo does like carrying it. He does like taking chances. And so Gakpo is going to run with the ball. That's going to leave some space. And if you have Robinson also doing that, that leaves open that entire channel if you lose the ball. And that's shown up in a couple of these games. So couple reasons to be worried, a couple reasons for optimism. And one last kind of bright spot is one guy that's really kind of impressed in some of these games is 17-year-old Ben Doak. And he plays like he's 25. So maybe the idea is you might not have to pay $100 million to replace Salah in a couple of years. You might have that in Ben Doak already. That's a lot of high praise to say for a 17-year-old. But the way he's able to take on players and beat senior level players already, as long as he doesn't suffer an injury and lose that pace, he hasn't necessarily added goals yet, but he had that at the youth level. He's definitely someone to watch going forward. And then Stefan Bacic was fantastic last season. He can maybe be a number when he comes back from injury. So. There are some reasons for optimism. I don't necessarily think they did finish fifth last season. I do think it was a little bit more luck than anything else. Remember there was that game versus Spurs where Jota just kind of got one out of nowhere. But they did start to concede it a lot last season. I think their last game versus Southampton finished 4-4. So if nothing else, they'll be a fun team to watch. I guess I'll just kind of say that they'll be headache for me, fun for the neutral. And then we'll move on to Brighton. See how we're doing for time. Could be worse. Then we'll move on to Brighton, who have done, it seems like they've got maybe a verbal agreement to sign Ajax's Mohamed Kudus, who would be, that would make them really, really interesting. He can maybe play in one of the front three, play in the line. He's got goals in him. And he's creative. He can take players on. He scored an amazing goal for Liverpool in the group stage of the Champions League last season. Um, and he's been looked at as kind of a one of those young names to kind of see. And it's interesting to see him maybe move to Brighton, because I think he's been linked to Chelsea. He's been linked to really big clubs. But to be fair, Brighton need to be looked at as a big club. They finished in Europe last season. They have a Europa spot. I actually fancy them to maybe be favorites, given the business that they've done. So we'll see. We'll see how they handle a different game load than they had last season. But they've also brought in Igor Julio. They were trying to get Levi Colwell, and Chelsea wouldn't budge. They brought in Yao Pedro, I think, Watford. He cost $30 million, but he's looked really good for them in the preseason. Pedro can play in any of that front three as well. They brought in James Milner, maybe like for vet leadership. The interesting one is Mahoud Dahoud, a Dortmund player who played for them in the preseason when Caicedo was missing games. He looks Brighton ready already. A dual winner and someone that's good at in build up, good at getting the ball quickly out of his feet, and he doesn't just do side to side stuff. He finds players that are open in space, and he's good at turning and creating space for himself. They got in Steven Alzadi back from loan, and the real interesting one is Simon Adingra, who is out on loan for someone in Belgium. He scored 13 or 15 goals in the Belgian league, and he's come in, at least he impressed in preseason. Got a couple of goals, and just he looks rapid. And he could maybe be another name to kind of watch going forward. We discovered Bitoma and Enciso last season watching Brighton. We might see fans that maybe weren't paying attention to the U.S. tour might see Simon Adingra score against their club this coming season. We'll have to see. And then as far as outgoings, they've lost Alexis McAllister, Dennis Undev. It looks like they've sold him. They've put Jeremy Sarmiento on loan. They've lost Rede Kadara on loan, and they've lost Levi Colwell, who they really wanted to replace. I think they were trying to do, Chelsea want Caicedo, and Brighton were like, okay, we'll give us Levi Colwell. We'll kind of do some kind of bid with that. And Chelsea have been very firm in not wanting to deal Levi Colwell. They just want to do like a big dollar amount for Caicedo. And I think that's the reason why Brighton went out and got Igor Julio, who played for Fiorentina, played in the Conference League final. So we'll kind of see. Apparently, he's known as a ball playing center back. So I mean that's probably what they need. Because after Adam Webster and Lewis Dunk, the other guy that they have, Van Heckel, I don't necessarily think is at the level. So yeah, I mean Brighton are a fun team. They've got their number of players that did impress in the U.S. in Pedro Adingra. They have Ferguson, who impressed last season, and now they have Welbeck as well, and Mitoma, Enciso, and Selly Marsh as kind of like offensive options. All of a sudden, Brighton are kind of starved a little bit for attacking options, and just the issue now is what's the objective with Caicedo? It doesn't seem like if they were going to sell him, they should have sold him earlier, because Chelsea were offering this. They wanted like 90 million. Chelsea were offering like 75 plus, 85 plus. So it seemed like Chelsea were close. If the idea was to sell him, you should have done that before the season, because you could have been able to get in a ready-made replacement, or they should be looking at a ready-made replacement now, with the idea that you're going to get this wad of money later on. And it doesn't seem like they've been doing that. So maybe the idea is they'll stick with Caicedo. Maybe they'll sell him a little bit in January. We'll kind of see. And if that's the case, I don't really see a flaw in Brighton. Maybe fullback depth. They do have Lamsty back. I don't really trust Veltman. And they do have a Stupien, but I don't really know who else he would play on the left side if something would happen to him. They were playing Pascal Gross in some of these games at fullback. He's not really a fullback by trade. And center back depth is interesting, because after Duncan Webster, now you have Ugo Julio. But that's kind of it. But to be honest, other than that, there's no reason to think Brighton are going to are not going to be able to improve, or at least stay with what they did last season. And the interesting thing is, in some of these preseason games, there was a time where Brighton had all this possession, all this ball, and there wasn't really a whole lot of end product. It did seem like once you got past, once you were able to break some lines, it's all about finishing. There was a game versus Newcastle where they ended up losing because they weren't able to necessarily take advantage of all that time on the ball that they had. So I mean that's the case for a lot of teams though. So I don't necessarily think that Ferguson can finish, Welbeck can finish, and Pedro you can now bring him on. So I don't necessarily think that'll necessarily be an issue. So Brighton I still think will be a fun team, as will Aston Villa. Aston Villa and Brighton kind of finished similar spots last season. I think they ended up getting the final Conference League spot. They brought in Moussa Diaby, they brought in Pau Torres and Yuri Tielemans, or I think they got in for free. Now they lost Morgan Sansa, they've lost Marvelous Nakambia, and they've lost Ashley Young. But it's interesting. We actually got to see Aston Villa play in person, and Pau Torres was like a center back in a four, and in possession he almost moved into like a kind of a back three. And he was really good. He's really good at covering distance out wide. This could be a fantastic signing for them. It's funny how Aston Villa were the team to actually look at him, because he's been linked to Man United all these years. And Moussa Diaby is going to be so much fun for them. They've got attacking options out wide for fun. With Jacob Ramsey, Leon Bailey, Ollie Watkins, as mentioned as well. Bundia can kind of be out wide, but can cut inside and be a playmaker. They look good. And in the middle, you have Tielemans, Douglas Luiz, and Kamara for central options. They're gonna be fun. Now a lot of this depends on maybe Kamara not being hurt, Douglas Luiz not being hurt, or Watkins. If something happens to Watkins, the team does definitely look different. But on paper, this starting 11 is good, very good. I think they're going to score a lot of goals. And it's interesting to see that with an Emery side. But I mean, they finished really strong to start last season. It's going to be hard to say why they shouldn't repeat that. It's Brighton-esque in the middle with Kamara and Luiz just kind of being able to dictate teams, dictate play. But they've added Moussa Diaby. They're going to be lethal in the attack going forward. I think. And Moussa Diaby is not going to be a creator to look for Watkins. He's got goals on him. He can also. He reminds me of a young Sadio Mane. To be honest, I remember watching him a few times at Leverkusen over the years. And it just seems he'll make head scratching plays where sometimes his head not necessarily is right. So maybe Emery can kind of coach this out of him. But he's got a wicked shot on him. And he's creative. He's aggressive. I'll say that. So he's gonna be fun to watch. And then we'll move on to Spurs. The big thing with Spurs is they've actually done some good business. They brought in a player like James Maddison who's looked really good for them in preseason, and he's given them an option where they finally have a connector to kind of play in midfield that can get the ball to the attackers in the right spaces, where they haven't had that in so many of these years. It feels like they missed that since losing Christian Eriksen like 4 years ago to Inter Milan. So if they can keep Harry Kane, I don't really know what to think of Spurs. Maybe Spurs could be looked at not only for Champions League but something higher. They've looked at to try to improve their defense a little bit. Mickey Van de Ven, didn't necessarily look great in the U21 Euros for Netherlands, or it was there was something, it might have been at the senior level where he got at a little bit, but and they've apparently signed Dejan Kulishevsky. Apparently he was on loan for the last couple of seasons, so they've kept him. They've lost a couple guys. They lost Clement Langlais. They've lost Harry Winks and Lucas Moura. I mean, defensive issues could still be a concern a little bit. But I mean, and they brought in a keeper for $20 million and Giuliano Vicario. I don't really know who that is. But it really is the Harry Kane drama. And are they good enough defensively? And who do they really have for CM? Betancourt is going to miss the first half of the season. Does Basuma come good for them this time around? It seems Basuma has been playing a little bit more in their preseason games. So we'll see. I mean, Basuma was this. Everyone wanted Basuma when he was at Brighton, and he had that sexual assault kind of issue that ended up going away. But I guess maybe that kind of took teams off them, and maybe that kind of got in his head a little bit. I think it was nothing ended up coming from it, but it's always kind of like scary when that stuff kind of gets linked out at you. But we'll see if he's able to bounce back or not. If he is, that does make their midfield definitely look a little stronger. I think Horberg's been linked to maybe leave as well. I mean, they've sold Harry Winks. Maybe they're going to bring in someone else for that midfield because you're going to be missing Betancourt for the first half of the season. So bringing James Maddison helps you in the final third, but you got to get the ball to James Maddison as well. Basuma can't, and I don't think I don't really trust Oliver Skip. As young as he is, maybe he can turn into something different. He was on their England's U21 team in Euros. They ended up winning. So maybe Skip can kind of take a jump. So we'll see. I mean, everything is riding though on Harry Kane. What do you do with Harry Kane? And because I can't imagine it's just going to be Richarlison that you roll with. And it seems like Harry Kane has been eyeing maybe looking at Bayern. I don't know if it's a Tuchel thing. To me, it's weird. You'd have to win the Champions League for this move to make sense to me. It's going to sound harsh, but if you're leaving to join a team that's won the league title for the last 11 years in a row, winning it for helping them win the 12th doesn't really. Yeah, you won some silverware in your career. I think doing that goal run it would be a little bit more special. You don't have to stay with Spurs, but one more year with Spurs. Now again, it's always risky because something you could suffer a bad injury and that could be it. So maybe that's kind of gone into his head as well. I don't know, but if he does stay one more year with Spurs, he can go anywhere he wants for free next year. So I don't know. Well, it seems we're going to have some Kane drama, and maybe the drama is going to, if he doesn't move to start the season, it could maybe affect him. Maybe Kane doesn't start off in the best light. So we'll have to see. Spurs are like Chelsea from last season, where I just have no idea what to do with them. A new coach with Ange Pochettino. I don't really know what to expect with them. So I mean, if nothing else, it's kind of a fun unknown with Spurs. And frankly, it'll be fun to watch if we do only get one season of it. It'll be fun to watch James Maddison and Harry Kane, because if it works and it works well, it'll be interesting to see if Gareth Southgate kind of notices that and tries that for England's Euros. So we'll see, and then we'll move on to Chelsea. See how we're doing for time. Could be better, but not terrible. Chelsea have barely spent $800 million under Todd Bowley, which is bonkers. $800 million in like 2 years. Where is financial fair play? They have sold a lot there this season, to be fair. But they signed Robert Sanchez, the third keeper from Brighton, who was starting for them a couple years ago. Started for them under Potter. I don't know if that was the idea to maybe try to one up Brighton and to be like, hey, give us Caicedo now or not. It seems like they're still linked to him. They've signed a center back, Axel Diaze, $45 million from Monaco. They've signed this young guy, Leslie Ugo Chakwaku. I can't say names, for 27 million at least on paper on like these analytics sites. This guy profiles almost exactly like Roman Lavia. And they got him for cheaper. So I don't know if the idea was, hey, we're not going to go for Lavia. We'll get this guy who's young, who can maybe kind of be a mentor or kind of learn under someone like Caicedo. I don't know if that's the kind of thinking. This is when this deal happened. It got a lot of people that I follow on Twitter like buzzing, who follow that league. So we'll see. They brought in Angelo, a $15 million winger that was in Brazil. Not a lot to know about him, but at least though in the U.S. preseason tour, he was fun. He was fun taking players on. He looks quick. He looks decisive. He has a really good touch on him. It'll be interesting to see if he gets some playing time, because they've apparently lost Christian Nkunku. Another player that impressed in their preseason was Ian Matson, who had a fantastic season last year at Burnley on loan. And it seems like they haven't necessarily sold him out, lend him out. yet, and I understand why. He was really good for them in their preseason. And then they brought in Christopher Nkunku, who they've apparently lost to injury. We'll get to, and then they Cesar Casade, Marlo Augusto. Marlo Augusto was another player that played well in the preseason. Andre Santos is kind of a defensive-minded DM. And then the main one is they brought in a striker in Nicholas Jackson of Villarreal, who didn't score a ton of goals at Villarreal, but at the same time we saw Newcastle take a shot on Alexander Isak, who also didn't score a ton of goals when he was at his club in Spain. And that's kind of worked out for Newcastle. Maybe Chelsea have found have decided to kind of do the same thing. He looked really good in their preseason, but again, preseason doesn't always translate to the regular season. So we'll see if he kind of struggles. If not, Chelsea do look a little different with him up top. And then out, they've sold Kai Havertz 75 million to Arsenal. They sold Mason Mount for 64 million, and they sold Kovacic for 30 million. And then they sold Christian Pulisic for 20 million. So they did a good job of actually getting some players off the books that they didn't necessarily fancy anymore for a good deal. And they sold Robin Loftus-Cheek to AC Milan for 16 million. And then this is where it really gets goofy. They sold Koulibaly for 23 million to a Saudi club. Edward Mendy about 20 million to a Saudi club, and I think they sold Ethan Ampadu to Leeds, which is funny because they just had him on loan last year. Leeds would have done well to have Ethan Ampadu last season. And then they lost Aubameyang for free. I think they loaned out David Fofana to Union Berlin. They lost Azpilicueta to I think Atletico Madrid, and then they lost N'Golo Kante to I think Onafuri. So there's been a whole lot of player turnover, and then João Felix's loan kind of ended. And then they brought in Levi Colwell, who was loaned at Brighton, which is important because they've had some injuries a little bit at center back. I mean, some of the positives, or I'll get to, they're still linked to Casado. They're weirdly linked to Tyler Adams, I saw, and then I think they may be still looking at striker options. It looks like they were linked to David Washington, a young Brazilian, 18 years old. I mean, the positives, they did have a strong preseason under new coach Mauricio Pochettino, and a bunch of their signings played well. I thought Nkunku played well. Unfortunately, they're not going to have him. Maybe even to till Christmas. I saw. I think he has to have surgery. But Jackson played well. Marlo Augusto played well. They finally have some cover for Reece James in case something happens with him. It seems like they can do. Maybe they can play him at the same time with Reece James kind of being at center back. In a three. It also seems like Pochettino normally plays in a 4-2-3-1. They were switching it up a little bit. They were three at the back in some of these games. And, it seems like everyone's kind of trying to find a way to kind of do have three in that line at some point in possession. That's where the game's kind of going with. But Marlo Augusto looks very good. I mean, Mudryk looked very good. Not just for Chelsea, looked good in the U21 Euros for Ukraine. It seems like he's maybe got his confidence back. I mean, that could be really big for them too. You're gonna miss in Nkunku. You're gonna need that's gonna give maybe someone some opportunity for Sterling, who didn't have his best season last year. They have Madueke as well, who starred in moments. They have Angelo. It feels like the idea was to maybe not play Nkunku on the wing, to maybe kind of play him underneath Nicola Jackson. So you're going to need to find someone that, funny enough, that actually would have fitted someone like Mason Mount, who they've lost. But it'll be interesting to see if they go out and get someone else for that role or not. They have been linked already to someone like Neymar, which seems wild. Chelsea just apparently can just do whatever they want, and no one cares. But because they have spent a boatload, but they've been able to bring a lot in as well. And kind of the interesting thing is, I'm wondering if the data guys that Graham Potter brought over, when he was brought to the club, is starting to kind of show, because the names that Chelsea have targeted and brought to the club, Angelo, Andre Santos, Marlo Augusto, it's not Neymar. It doesn't fit this, but it's not the names that they were linked to, I guess, in the past. We'll say it's not like the ready-made star names. It seems like maybe like the Uku Makata. I don't say that. Leslie DM. He's another like kind of like maybe a stats gem. it seems like maybe their data guys have taken over the operation there, and if so, under someone like Pochettino who likes credibly likes working with younger talent. He did amazing stuff with Southampton. Then he did really good job with Spurs when he was there. And the only issue with Spurs is he ran his guys ragged to the ground, and his owners weren't able to replenish the squad. I think that's kind of the issue. And then with PSG, it's just impossible to manage egos, and it's possible to get Neymar, Mbappe, and Messi to work without the ball and sprint to try to win it back. And it seems like that's what you need in this day and age. And now Pochettino has got that, and he's got young legs everywhere. So I mean, Chelsea are going to be another team that's going to be fun to watch. They're an unknown again last season, but it feels like if you're a Chelsea fan, you maybe have a little bit more optimism. The only issue is the center back is an issue. They have a center back crisis. Sold Koulibaly. It looks like Thiago Silva is still a senior player, and he's 38 now. They've lost Leslie Fofana to, I think, an ACL. Badiashile, I think, is out injured. So they have Levy Colwell, they have Chalobah, Thiago Silva, Humphreys, and they brought in Axel Diassi. But I mean, that could be an issue. We'll have to necessarily see. And then, I mean, the first game is going to be Liverpool, so we'll see how that looks. The way that Liverpool were so vulnerable to just a ball over the top, I'm trying to imagine Enzo getting some space and being able to just kind of chip something over the top for like someone like Jackson to make a run in behind. That'll worry me. But yeah, we'll see what they try to do with Nkunku. And I do have an option where someone like Ryan Cherki, he played well for the U21 for France. He feels like he kind of suit a little bit what they're looking for. He reminds me a lot of Eden Hazard, like a young Eden Hazard before he went to Chelsea. It's the way he glides on the ball and is creative. He's one of those aesthetic dribblers, if that's a thing. But he's a lot of fun to watch. He's got a good shot on him. He's got low center of gravity. It just is he's creative, and he can maybe be a little plug-in. Someone like Kudus, actually, if Chelsea want to try to snap him off Brighton, which would only tick off Brighton a little bit more, it feels like Kudus can maybe be a similar player in that 10 spot as well if they try to look there. But we'll see. We'll see. It doesn't feel like they're not going to do nothing. If nothing else, maybe they try to sell someone off and then try to replace them, because while it's only going to be a short-term option, because Nkunku, when he comes back, is going to be, you imagine, featuring for them. You don't want to, you not having him till, if he's going to have surgery, at least till November is an issue. So we'll see what the option is. I guess the short-term option is try Sterling there. Try Sterling kind of more centrally, and maybe try Madueke, Mudryk, as maybe your wide options instead. We'll kind of see. But the first game is Liverpool, and so we'll get a chance to see how we should treat Chelsea or not, or how worried we should be from Liverpool's perspective or not. And then we've got the kind of relegation contenders or teams I'm a little bit more worried about. We'll start with the mainstays. The obvious one is Wolves. I mean, they've done some transfer business. They brought in Martinez Cunha. They had him last season, but he was on loan. They paid $50 million for him off Atletico Madrid. And I think they've brought in Boubacar Traore for $11 million. And then they've got Connor Cody. They returned from loan. They got Fabio Silva, who returned from loan. And then Gonzalo Guedes, who's returned from loan. And I think they brought Matt Doherty back to the club for free. They sold him a couple seasons ago. They brought him back. But they lost Nathan Collins to Brentford. They lost Ruben Neves for $55 million to a Saudi club. And they sold Ryan Giles $5 million. And then they sold Raul Jimenez $6 million to Fulham, which is very interesting. And they lost Diego Costa. So I mean, Lopetegui is a good coach. If he stays, there's still talks that maybe that's not going to be a thing. I've even seen Gary O'Neill, the former Bournemouth coach, and mentioned as someone that can maybe come in. If that's so, I mean, I do like what O'Neill did last season, but I would definitely. I'm worried about them with Lopetegui. I worry about them with O'Neill. I mean, the one positive is they have had a decent. They've apparently looked okay in preseason. Neto was good. Had a good Euros run for Portugal. Neto was seen as a really top up and coming, wide player, scoring wide player, before his injury. So maybe he's kind of finally. It's taken a while for him to recover from that. So if he can kind of bring some goals back with him, that would definitely help their attack. Mateus Cunha it will be fun. Gritas. They still have Wang. So uh, not having Neves, the midfield's going to be different though. You have Yao Gomez. So I mean that's something, but you're not going to have. It's not going to be that Moutinho Neves midfield anymore. It's going to be a lot. It's going to ride on Yao Gomez and Mateus. So Wolves are a little. Wolves are definitely a team I'm really concerned about. Mateus Nunes. Um, and then Fulham. Fulham is a team I'm concerned about as well. They've brought in Calvin Bassey, a center back, from Ajax, which they needed because they've had a center back crisis as well. They brought in Raul Jimenez for $6 million, and they brought in they got even Caviera back from loan, but out. So Nessens Cabano free. They've lost a lot of guys for free. They haven't necessarily sold anyone. Um, I mean, the concerns are Paulinho was a big player for them. He was linked to a leave, linked to an exit, and then he got hurt. He got hurt playing in a preseason game by landing on his shoulder, playing as center back, and he was playing as center back because they're missing Tosin to injury. They're missing Tim Ream to injury, and so starting your best defensive midfielder and as a center back, and he gets hurt playing that position, that's an issue because after him it's also Lukic and I mean maybe it's Harrison Reed who aren't necessarily. Harrison Reed's a good player, but I don't think he's a defensive midfielder. So it'll be interesting to see how long they're without Paulinho. I think Tim Ream is about as close to being able to return, so that'll help. Calvin Bassey will probably start for them if not. Um, and so we'll see how that works. Kind of the big thing is they've lost Mitrovic. Mitrovic throw to stink. I don't necessarily know if they've sold him yet, but it seems like he's not wanting to train. He wants to move. He wants to either go to a Saudi club or he just wants to move. Um, the manager didn't play him for preseason. He said he's not training. He's not playing. The manager was actually linked to maybe leave, and he's actually he's stuck with the club. So that's good for Fulham. But Fulham were kind of a weird team last season where they felt like they finished way higher than maybe they should have. That's maybe a little harsh, but it does feel like at least the metrics didn't necessarily love them last season, and it feels like you're not going to have Mitrovic. Replacing him with Jimenez doesn't necessarily seem like for like. Now I did see Fulham play Chelsea in person. And what was interesting is Yao Jimenez basically won every 50-50 header in the air. And I think he scored for them in preseason. And maybe he's gotten over that head injury because I thought that was maybe the reason why he was struggling a little bit at Wolves. Which honestly, it makes a ton of sense. He broke his head, fractured his skull. I think is the medical term for it. It makes sense why he would maybe be gun shy. In many respects, but it didn't seem like he was in the preseason games. And so if he can get back to what he was before that, he was considered a top 10 striker in the league when he was scoring. He was scoring like close to 20 goals for Wolves in a couple of those seasons. So maybe it works out. We'll have to see. Carlos Vinicius had played well and when Mitrovic was missing last season. For them, Yao Polina, not Yao Polina, shoot, the creative Pereira, Andres Pereira, was a good player for them last season. He hasn't necessarily played a ton of preseason for them, and he was an important creative player for them. So getting him back will be helpful. It seems like Harry Wilson has turned into a better player than he was. He had a good end to the season last season. Apparently, he's done well in preseason. So there may be some better reasons for optimism. I mean, Andre Robinson continues to look really good. He was featured in every kind of preseason game, and so maybe they have enough to be okay. Well, just as far as just a team I'm a little bit more worried about, it would be Fulham, as will this team. which is not going to please my buddy Jeremy in Brentford. The transfer business, they brought in Nathan Collins of Wolves for 26 million. They paid 25 or 26 million for Kevin Shota. He was on loan last season, and they've decided to make that permanent from Freiburg. And then they brought in a keeper, Mark Flecken, from Freiburg. And then the interesting one is this guy, Yahir Yamaluk, a midfielder. Apparently, he was on loan last season. He's 18. He looked again, watching him in person, he looked really good on the ball. He looked big on field at least. Maybe 5'11", 6 feet. But he had a good touch on him. He was turning. He seemed to have his head up. He was able to find players making runs upfield. He seemed very attack minded. And he was fun to watch. I mean, for being 18, you imagine he's not going to see a ton of game time, but Brentford seems to kind of struggle with that kind of player at the moment. So we'll see. And then they've had some outgoings. They sold Mads Bergstrup, 6 million to Salzburg, who I've been kind of nudging my buddy Jeremy, who's a Brentford fan, because he's going to be a player I've been kind of noticing just personally. And I thought it was interesting that they sold him to Salzburg. And then I looked yesterday, and he was maybe player of the match for the recent Salzburg game. So it'll be fun to kind of follow him. It's interesting that they sold him, and I didn't try to. They only sold him for 6 million too. They didn't try to loan him. They've sold Halil Dervishgushu just for 500,000 to Galatasaray, and they've lost Godos and Patris Janssen and Tariq Fosu Henry on freeze. I mean, the reason why is a little concerning. We'll start with the positives, I guess. Josh Da Silva and Weissa and Bremo had really good U.S. summer tour, and I think that that young guy Yamaluk impressed me when I saw him in person. But obviously, the concerns to start with is you're not going to have Ivan Toney to start the season. Now, you imagine that's going to affect them, but at the same time, Weissa being played through the middle has been really good. He scored a number of goals in preseason. He created a lot of chances. It seems like he can play with his back to goal. He's almost better playing in the middle than actually being played out wide. He looks comfortable, and that partnership with Mbremo and Weissa to me looks pretty good. So I don't necessarily think they're going to struggle necessarily for goals by missing Toney as much as maybe people expect. I'm kind of taking a take from my buddy Jeremy, because he's been talking in my ear about this. He's really high on Weissa, and after kind of watching him in person and watching in a couple US games, on Peacock for that summer tour, I see where he was coming from. And Brentford didn't have an issue scoring to end the season when they were missing Toney. So I can't imagine why that's not going to continue. The real issue is, what do they do with David Raya? I felt like one, at least the stats wise, considered he was like the either the best or the second best shot stopper in the league last season. But he's also just fantastic with his feet. He helps Brentford kind of keep the ball a little bit when they can kind of be sometimes careless with it. If Arsenal or someone tried to find a way to lure him away, the Flacken guy did not impress me. Unfortunately, again, preseason is preseason. It can be meaningless, but it can offer you a glimpse to the future as well. So that'll be something to watch. It definitely, if nothing else, it's not the same player when the ball's at his feet. I can definitely say that with confidence. And then the interesting one is something that, again, I'm going to steal from my buddy Jeremy. He's been worried that the core of the team is one basically that was promoted with the championship side. They haven't really had a ton of success in the transfer market. Well, one of them was maybe Christian Eriksen. But so they need Kevin Shota and Lewis Potter to come good for them this season, because Lewis Potter, to me, looks really he looks undersized for being able to play on the wing. We watched him in that game versus Aston Villa at the FedEx Field, and when Kevin Shota did not play well in the middle. They were much better when Weissa was played instead. So Shota maybe is better out wide, and Lewis Potter did not look good at all going against whoever Villa was playing. It wasn't Moussa Diaby. It was like it was some young winger with like two names. But Weissa looked. I mean, not Weissa. Lewis Potter looked undersized, and he needs to become good for them. So does Damsgaard. Damsgaard ended up having a good season for them last season, towards the end of the season. But can he continue that, or does he go backwards? And Josh Da Silva. Josh Da Silva actually had a very good preseason, so we'll see if that can continue. Another thing too is we didn't see Northgard for a lot of this preseason. Hembeck and Janelt. The midfield maybe looks a little bit better with Norgard in. You're able to keep the ball a little bit more. They have brought Nathan Collins in with Ben Mee to have some center back depth. If you're going from Ponching Johnson or Zanka playing some games to maybe Collins having to step in case something happens to Pennick or Ben Mee, or maybe you want to play a three back. That maybe makes you better, at least defensively. If they keep David Raya, I'm not really worried about Brentford. If they don't, I will be. And there's also a suggestion that maybe they're trying to get Brennan Johnson from Nottingham Forest. So that'll be another kind of attack-minded player on the wing. It seems like if they do that, then they may be a little bit more concerned with Lewis Potter than I would expect, because it seems like they're fine with, or maybe they don't trust Shada. But because it seems Mbremo and Weissa are quite good at kind of being that front two, or if you're playing in a 4-3-3 like they were doing last season, it seems Mbremo and Weissa can be, Weissa in the middle, Mbremo on the wide area, and you just need one more. So that can either be Shada or maybe if it's Brennan Johnson, we'll have to see. And then Everton. Everton are going to be a team that you just don't really know what they're doing. There was a lot of talk after they escaped relegation by the skin of their teeth that maybe they were going to finally do some transfer business. And what they've done is they brought in Danjuma, I believe, I think on loan. But they've sold Yuri Mina on a free, or they've lost Yuri Mina on a free. They've sold or they've lost Ellis Sims, who I think Coventry City, and then they've sold Moise Kean $30 million to Juventus. And I don't really think they brought anyone in, and it looks like they're going to miss Dwight McNeil to start the season with suffering a bad ankle injury. Tarkowski isn't expected to be fit to start the season. And you've lost you've lost Connor Cody. You're not going to have him from loan. So I mean, they brought in Ashley Young as well. So they brought in Danjuma on loan, and they brought Ashley Young on a free. But they sold Moise Kean for $30 million. So there's at least some money there for something. So maybe they get some. Maybe they do. They get their pocketbook out towards the end of the transfer window. But they haven't really done anything yet. If something happens to Calvert-Lewin, yikes! They're in the exact same spot they were in last year. So maybe the one positive is James Garner had a really good stretch for England's U21s. James Garner was a really good player for them last season. It almost seemed like he was more of their fullback or wingback than necessarily a midfielder. So I mean, that's kind of maybe you kind of go with that for kind of being hopeful. Other than that, it is goal. Maybe Danjuma will help them out wide, give them a little bit more of an offensive output, at least. But they don't really have anyone in the middle if something happens to Calvert-Lewin, which is the exact same predicament they had last season. So I imagine they do something to rectify that. If not, I'm real worried about Everton again. And then we'll move on to Bournemouth. Bournemouth have actually done some business. They've brought in so a defender, Milos Karic from AZ Alkmaar. They had Hamid Junior Traore last season, but it was on loan, so they've paid $26 million to get him from Sassuolo, and they brought in Justin Kluivert, Patrick Kluivert's son, for $11 million from AS Roma. And so they have lost Mark Travers, Sirika Dembele. It looks like they've loaned Romain Favre to Laurent. Jordan Zamora, they've lost to Udinese. And then Jefferson Lerma, it looks like he's left for Crystal Palace. I mean, the concerns for me are, it was such a good job that Gary O'Neill did to help them keep them up. That manager was like, there's a ceiling with you here. And maybe they're right. Instead of, kind of waiting out, at least a preseason, waiting out a summer, they did it immediately. So I guess that's fair. So they brought in Andoli Irola, a Spanish coach that impressed with Rayo Vallecano. in La Liga the last few years. So he took them to promotion, and then a club that people didn't necessarily didn't spend a whole lot. They did have a couple stars that I noticed. Falcao, I think, was playing for them. But he was able to keep them up the last 2 seasons. I think mid-table. So maybe Bournemouth kind of sees that as kind of a way where that's what they need to look at. And so we'll see. I mean, they did spend a little bit. They spent a bunch in January. They spent a little bit here. So it seems like their owners are a little bit ambitious. But the issue for them last season wasn't necessarily in possession or out of possession. It was really on set piece defense. They need to find a way to improve on that. Otherwise, yeah, they're going to struggle to stay up again. But they should be fun in attack though. You have Kluivert, Solanke, this Traore guy, Watatara, and it's not Travers. It's Tavernier. Tavernier once they get back from injury. So they should be fun and attack. So we'll have to see. And they did seem like they did a little bit improve on defending towards the end of the season. So I don't know if that was Gary O'Neill or just something else. They did bring in someone like Zubimendi. Sorry, his name starts with a Z. So maybe he'll kind of be looked at and in the starting spot as a center back. So we'll have to see. Then we move on to Nottingham Forest. They brought in Anthony Elanga, 17 million from Man United. They bought Chris Wood, 17 million from Newcastle, and then Oli Aina, they brought in for free. And then they've lost Richie Laera. They've loaned him to Vancouver, which is interesting. Sam Surich, they've lost him to Nashville FC. They lost Jesse Lingard, Andrew Ayew, left on a free. And then they loaned Lewis O'Brien to DC United. And then they've lost Dean Henderson, end of loan. And they've lost Lodi, end of loan. Losing Lodi could be big because he was important for them last season. So it's interesting to see them loan a couple players out to the MLS. You don't see other teams do that, and it's because of the calendar difference. Maybe it's kind of a cheeky way to kind of, once the MLS season ends, maybe you get your player back, and you still have the season to go. And maybe if they impress, in that MLS season, that can give you like a new player. So it's cheeky to see them kind of do this outside the box thinking. Brentford been heavily linked to one of their players in Brendan Johnson, which you mentioned, but they've also brought in Anthony Elanga. So I don't know if the idea is to maybe kind of with that in mind. It'll be interesting to see Anthony Elanga because I thought, Man United probably wasn't the stage for him at this point in his career, given his youth. I did feel like he showed some promise when he was able to play, but he did have some mistakes in him. But so maybe given a different environment, he'll definitely see less of the ball. But the way Forest were playing last season, they only had like 20% of the ball in some games, maybe even less. So it'll be Countertown, and maybe he'll help them with that. So we'll have to see. I mean, Morgan Gibbs-White was a player of the season for them, you could argue, and Morgan Gibbs-White's another player that had a really good U21 Euros for England. So maybe Forest will have done enough to be up. They spent a boatload last season. They haven't necessarily done that this season. Still time in the window for them to do something. It's interesting that it looks like they're going to switch out Henderson for maybe Matt Turner, but Matt Turner will be joining a team with Keylor Navas. So you don't imagine Matt Turner is going to be starting for them anytime soon, unfortunately for us. But Nottingham Forest is going to be a team that they're able to stay up last season. I don't necessarily know if they can find lightning in the bottle again. We'll have to see. And then another team that is kind of in a similar boat is Crystal Palace, who ended the last season on fire after moving on from Patrick Vieira, which completely is egg on my face last season. I didn't think that was going to work out. So they've stuck up with Roy Hodgson, but the issue is more what they've done in the transfer window. They brought in Jefferson Lerma for free. Lerma was a good player at Bournemouth, so fair for that. And then they brought in a Brazilian striker, Mateus Franca, 20 million. 6 feet. He's 19 from Flamengo. He's a wild card because he only played 9 games for Flamengo, and I think he only scored a goal or two. But 19, so it is what it is. But you're taking a gamble. I do like the idea of trying something new. Brighton have shown that there are hidden gems out there outside of Europe, so here's a chance for that. But the real issue is they've lost Wilfried Zaha on a free to Galatasaray. I was not expecting Zaha to go to Galatasaray. Maybe Galatasaray has Champions League. So that maybe is what Zaha wants to do. But I was surprised by that, and they've been linked. There've been links everywhere about Michel Olise being linked to either Man City or Chelsea, and it seems like Roy Hodgson doesn't know what the player wants, and it seems like maybe the player, or at least the agent, is trying to manufacture something. So that would be another kind of creative player that that helped them last season. And Eze is maybe the most important creative player now. But Elise was every bit as special towards the that dying stretch. So I do think they would need to bring at least someone else in if they lost Elise. I think they need to bring in someone just losing Zaha. So we'll see if they kind of get more active as September kind of gets closer. Um, and the real issue is sticking with Roy Hodgson. Is that the right call or not? I mean, there was a reason why it didn't work the first time with him. But I mean, he went on such a run with him returning. Maybe it will work out. We'll have to see. And maybe there'll be more chances, more opportunities for uh, Chris Richards. On our on the U.S. team, because it seems like either Mark Gahey or Anderson has been linked to maybe move. So we'll see, I guess, from that respect as well. So Crystal Palace are a team that I feel like I say that every year, and I always get egg on my face every year. But Crystal Palace, they got to do something else than what they've done. It's worth saying that. I mean, Jefferson Lerma was a good player for Bournemouth. They've lost Milivojevic. Maybe they've got. I don't know if they've lost Lokanga or not. Liverpool apparently were linked to Decore. But it seems like they're maybe going to hang on to check Decore. And so the midfield might actually be okay, pretty good shape. I remember last season their defense was kind of rough though. Both fullbacks were kind of an issue. So I don't know if they've necessarily addressed that. So yeah, Palace I think have some concerns, as does this team, because West Ham have sold Declan Rice for 120 million, and they've done nothing with it so far. They've been linked to Ajax's Ederson Alvarez, which makes sense, especially if you're going to play with a DM that can also kind of jump into center back if needed. It seems like he can play in multiple positions. That doesn't seem like a terrible solution. But they've lost Manuel Lanzini on a free to River Plate. But it seems the big issue is who else they've been linked with. It seems David Moyes has a type, because there have been bids everywhere, it sounds like, for Man United's Scott McTominay, and apparently Man United's Harry Maguire. And on its face, I don't actually hate it. It's not like West Ham play with a high line, so I don't necessarily think Harry Maguire would be caught out that way. It seems like they're going to play without the ball a lot. You need maybe you need to be able to defend crosses in the air. You got to have a set defense, further back. I don't actually hate the idea of Harry Maguire. Now I hate the fee that's been said, and with McTominay, I don't hate it either. To be honest, I feel like if you're going to bring in Alvarez, maybe the idea is to kind of move off from it's not Strucker. I'll remember his. There was a tall player that was like kind of a partnership with Declan Rice. Maybe the idea is to kind of move off from him to someone like Scott McTominay, who can be a little bit more further forward and kind of be a number in the box. I feel like Man United have misplayed McTominay because they haven't really had a well structured DM until Casemiro has showed up, and then McTominay just didn't necessarily have a spot in the 11 after that. But I do think McTominay is kind of a hardworking 8 that can be in the box and be being attack minded in the box. I do understand. I understand why that would be interesting to Moyes. But again, the price tag has been kind of out there. Apparently, they bid 30 million yesterday, and Man United rejected it. I've heard 60 as a number that's been thrown out, and that does seem way too high. But we'll see if they kind of get him out. I'm gonna try to look up this guy's name because that's actually bothering me a little bit. And then we'll move on to the 3 promoted clubs. So starting off with Burnley, for the transfer business is they have been quite active. So they get Wout Weghorst back from loan. They've spent 15 million for a defender from Gladbach and Jordan Beyer. They spent 7 million for a defender from West Brom and David Adara O'Shea. And then they've spent 18 million for a forward from Basel in Zeki Ami Douani. And then they've spent 3 million for a forward from a 18-year-old forward from Espanyol B in Luku Kolosholu. It's probably not how you say his name, but I like the idea of him going to Espanyol B. That's some interesting recruitment there. And then they got a forward from loan from Hoffenheim and Jakob Brun Larsen. And then they've spent or they've brought in Enrock Ajayi for free, who's from KV Mechelen. I can't say names. But a lot of these, interesting, they're linked to a lot of forwards, a lot of young forwards. But the main one is James Trafford. They've paid 18 million to got him off City. He was keeper of the tournament in the U21 Euros. He saved a PK versus Spain at the dying minutes to win the tournament. He was fantastic for them last season, so it makes sense for them to want to keep him. And for 18 million, he's 18 or he's very, very young. But hey, if you it was good for you last season, why would you change it? So good for them there. And then they also brought in Michelle Obafemi, a striker from Swansea who played well. Also brought in Nathan Redmond on a free. But they have lost a couple players. They have lost Nathan Tella, who was big for them last season, maybe player of the season for them last season, as was Ian Matson, who's now at Chelsea. And then they've lost people like Ashley Barnes, Peacock Farrell, Matthew Loughton, and maybe Jordan Beyer is kind of the big one. But I mean, positives is that they held on to the young English keeper, and they have been active. It's not the same Burnley that we saw all those years when Dyche was with them. Suchek. Suchek is a West Ham player. Phil. And I think it's interesting. It's not going to be the Burnley that we saw that got relegated, where the football is going to be much better on the eye. They were fantastic under company. In one season, he was just able to completely change how they played, and that's also kind of reflected in how the player roster, the player profiles have changed. All that, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of players, if any, that are still on that team that got relegated a couple of seasons ago. It seems like they've moved on from everyone, really, and they play some really attractive stuff. At least they did in the championship, and they ran through the championship under first year head coach and Vincent Kompany. So the football they play is going to be fun. And if there's maybe a concern, there is I think a lot of people will still kind of pick them to go down just because it's a promoted club. But that said, we've now seen a few years now where there've been a promoted club or two that have been fine at getting finding adjusting to the Premier League, and all three stayed up last season, to be honest. And so, if there's maybe going to be a team to do it this year, I think it's going to be safe to assume a lot of people would pick Burnley out of the others. And I'll do that as well. But they do have a young squad, and they've lost two big players that were big for them in Nathan Tella and Ian Matson. So, if they're looking to maybe kind of do a little bit more business in the market now, I know they've spent a lot of money to bring in young attacking players. I feel like someone like Oxlade Chamberlain, who's maybe out there for free, I don't necessarily know if it would work with wages, but that's maybe someone I would look at. But I don't know if they're necessarily done or not. But it'll be fun to see how they line up versus Man City, because they get them this coming Friday, and then that kicks us off. And then we'll move on to Sheffield United. So for transfer business, they've brought in Austin Trusty from Arsenal, the U.S. player that I mentioned. They've brought in a Yasser Larouchi, former Liverpool player who was on loan from Troyes. I think he's like a kind of attack-minded fullback. And then Bini Traore from Hacken, a Norwegian league. The main one is Ilian Ndiaye, who they've lost to Marseille, and then they've lost James McAtee. The concern here is I don't necessarily think that they've done enough in the transfer business, and losing McAtee is big, but also losing Ilian Ndiaye, who is a leading scorer for them last season with 14 goals, but he had 10 assists for them last season as well. Other than that, I think the second leading striker or scorer was Oliver McBurnley. So it feels like Sheffield need to do a little bit more. Otherwise, I'm not going to be the only one probably picking them to go down. We'll have to see. Again, still some time for them to sort things out. Losing McAtee though is really big. He was spectacular for them the second half of the season on loan. And what's funny is one person's I wouldn't say one person's trash is another person's treasure. One person's treasure is another person's treasure. Because it looks like Luton Town have brought in McAtee for loan from City. So they brought in Chidozie Ogbeni, a forward 26. They brought in a McAtee on loan from City. Mads Yule Anderson, a defender. They brought in Timothy Chong, a midfielder from Man United, and they brought in they had Marvelous Nkambia last season on loan. They've made that official, and they brought in Ryan Giles, a defender, and they've also brought in Issa Kabore, a on loan from City. So City are helping Luton Town out a little bit here, and then they brought in Kaminsky, a keeper. On things out, they've lost Ethan Horvath and Joe Taylor. And then a couple like Ethan Thorpe. Joe Taylor was maybe the big one. I think they lost because he scored in the championship final, but it was called off. So it's interesting to see them. I mean, their forward line to me has goals in it for Luton Town. Elijah Adebayo is 25. He's going to be really interesting to watch because he stood out to me in the championship final. He's 6'4". He doesn't seem he has any issues biting people off. He has a good touch and turn on him. He's quick, not just for his size, but he just looks quick in general. The only issue is he only scored 7 goals last season in the championship, but 16 big chances missed. To be fair to him, so it doesn't feel like creating chances was a problem. It was just the finishing. But it seems like he didn't have an issue creating issues for defenders. Now, a different level of defender, to be fair, but it seems like he could maybe be a hidden gem. We'll have to follow him, Elijah Adebayo. And then they brought in a Cheesy Ogbani from Rotherham. Again, only 8 goals last season, but he has a few caps for Ireland. But the real one is Carlton Morris. They've kept hold of him. He was the leading goal scorer last season with 20 goals. And James McAtee, they've brought James McAtee that was at Sheffield. He's a City player. I was wondering if the City were going to hold on to him, to be honest, with given the things that the players that they've lost. But they've been able to get another loan out of him, and he was creative. I think he scored like 10 goals for them last season. He had a number of assists as well, and it looks like he's probably going to be their main supplier. And Chong is kind of a creative-minded midfielder as well. So it's interesting how both Man United and City have maybe helped Luton Town out here a little bit, and we'll see if that comes good for them. Now, the only thing to say here is Leeds and Leicester showed that it's not really about a team's attack for why teams usually go down. They have brought in Ryan Giles, a defender. They brought in Issa Kabore, a defender on loan from Man City as well. So they have brought in some defenders, and they have brought in another keeper. But they conceded 39 goals last season, which seems high for the championship, but that was tied for second best with Sheffield. And I think Burnley conceded 36 goals, which again, to me, that feels high. But they're also playing. They're playing 2 games a week every single week. Maybe that's just in general. I haven't actually noticed that. But we'll see if that pans out. I don't really know enough about their defense, but Luton Town are probably going to be a team a lot of people look to go down. I would probably put Sheffield before them. And to be honest, if Palace don't necessarily get things right, Fulham don't get things right, you could have Wolves don't get things right. You could have them in the mix instead. So we'll have to see. Luton Town also have a fun stadium for people that haven't necessarily watched. They've done some renovations, but apparently it's not much you can do to renovate their stadium. It's kind of a cool neighborhood type stadium, I guess is kind of the way to put it. And then that's kind of it. The season officially kicks off this Friday. Man City versus Vincent Kompany's Burnley. A game that we saw in the FA Cup earlier last season, and City kind of spanked them a little bit. I think it was like 6-0. So we'll see how much has changed. And then it really kicks off Saturday with a full slate of games, Saturday and Sunday, and it ends with Man United and Wolves on Monday. And then, again, transfer window doesn't close until September 1st. So it feels like a lot of these teams aren't really going to be settled for quite some time. So again, as I mentioned earlier, maybe it'll give some teams that are settled an early boost. We'll have to see. And so that is it. That is it. We took a break for a little bit. It was good to kind of get back going again. Good to talk about what happened with the Women's World Cup. I definitely wanted to talk about that, and it was good to talk about the Community Shield. And yeah, it was just good to kind of do this again. I'm sure we'll try to get Rex back, and maybe try to get Jeremy back for some Brentford stuff going forward. But with that said, I just wanted to kind of just get something out because we hadn't done something in a bit, and that'll be our show. So, for us or for me at the Reserve Squad, you stay squatting and stop recording.